Chapter 1457. It was agreed upon when they came that the Golden Horde would provide all the food and fodder. If they won the war, they would be rewarded. That was the source of their motivation. But now, even the Golden Horde had no food to eat. What was the point of them staying here? Were they waiting to starve to death? When the resentment started to spread, the cavalry of the two tribes started to retreat. This exposed a huge gap in the front line, allowing the 100,000 men cavalry to enter. The Golden Horde's cavalry was already unable to put up any resistance. Many tribes even started to surrender to the Golden Horde. As the newly appointed Great Khan, Bo-La naturally saw everything that had happened. He hurriedly sent people to find Shamask and Mao Lahong. He wanted their support and was willing to pay a price for it. Unfortunately, the moment they saw the rations in the city burned and the chaos in the Golden Horde, the two leaders no longer dared to trust Bo-La. This man clearly did not have the ability to control things like his father, yet he still insisted on fighting the Han army to the death. This clearly showed that he did not know when to stop or when to retreat. How could someone like this be a qualified ally? The two chiefs were worried that if they waited any longer, they would be stuck and would not even have a chance to escape. They did not even bid farewell to Bora before retreating with their army. The departure of the two major tribes, along with over 200,000 of their cavalry, made the Golden Horde's situation even worse. Especially when Great Khan Bo-La heard this news, he almost fainted. There were hundreds of thousands of soldiers. They had only fought for less than 8 hours, and the outcome had already been decided. This was something that he had never thought would happen. In the face of such a predicament, even if his father, Tha Dahan, was still alive, he would also be helpless. The success of the war was also beyond Yang Chendong's expectations. Originally, he thought that even if he won this battle, it would take at least a few months for the outcome to be decided. This was because the Golden Horde only needed to retreat to New Salam when the battle went south. That would be an additional barrier. Even if the city walls were blasted open by the cannons, who knew how many days the ensuing street battles would take to end? He never thought that things would go so smoothly. First, the cannons killed Mahama, throwing the enemy into chaos. Then, the enemy's morale was shaken, and they gave up waiting for the army to advance at lightning speed, scaring more than 200,000 enemy cavalry into fleeing. In this way, the difference in military strength between the two sides was not that great, and he even had a slight advantage in battle. Since that was the case, this battle was decided. Send people to keep an eye on the two tribes that escaped. I want to know where they are staying and their specific information. Also, stop attacking and use psychological tactics. The Golden Horde may have lost this battle, but they still have their strength. It would be best if we could use them. Yang Chendong quickly issued a number of targeted military orders after learning about the situation. Shamask and the other two tribes left decisively. They didn't say a word to anyone and just left the rest of the Golden Horde's army outside the city. By the time Bo-La knew that the situation was heading for the worst, he was about to lead his army back into the city when he discovered that the road to the city gates had been blocked. He and several other tribes were gathered in front of the gates, ready to fight to the death. Are they trying to rebel? Bolt roared furiously when he heard Scout General Bodo explain the current situation to his face. He was the current Khan of the Golden Horde. A small tribe like he wouldn't even give them a second glance. But now, they were being suppressed by the enemy. How could he not be angry? Seeing how angry Bo-La was and how he was about to give the order to charge, Bodo hurriedly tried to dissuade him. Great Khan, you can't. Our army has just encountered an unforeseen event, and our morale is in chaos. This is not the time to start a battle. We should rest, reorganize, and raise morale. Otherwise, this kind of army won't be able to win any battles. Bodo also wanted to say that this kind of army was likely to collapse in a single blow. If that happened, they would have to give up their last chance to turn the tables. How could the fuming Bo-La not know this? Although he was very angry, he hadn't lost his mind. It was because of this that he didn't give the order to charge. Alright, since that's the case, I'll leave this matter to you. Go talk to them and have them open the gates immediately. Let this Khan in, no matter the price. He knew that if he stayed outside the city without any obstacles, he would only be a sitting duck. Only by entering the city and relying on the city's buildings would they be able to fight a battle of attrition. As for the provisions, although a lot of them were burned, there were still some hidden underground in the city. This was probably a case of a crafty rabbit having 3 burrows. No ruler would place all their hopes on one thing or one person. Bodo had a bitter expression. He knew that the current situation wasn't a good time to negotiate, but since the Khan had given the order, he had no other choice. He could only agree and leave the central tent. After Bodo left, another general named Chiwen walked into the tent. When he saw Bola, he bowed and said, "This general greets the Khan. Uncle, please rise." Bola no longer had his angry expression towards Chiwen. Instead, he spoke with an amiable expression, even taking a step forward and making a gesture of supporting Chiwen. General Chiwen was different from others. He was a member of the clan and one of the fierce generals by his father's side when he was alive. According to seniority, Bola had to call him uncle. Moreover, this person was very good at fighting and was very capable. Because of this, his father was wary of him and suppressed him everywhere. That was why he wasn't very famous. However, this person's ability was obvious to all. At least when it came to war, Bola was definitely not his opponent. Now that they were in a life and death situation, Bola couldn't care less about these taboos. Based on the principle of capable people do more work, he had to use Chiwen. Bola's courtesy made Chiwen shed tears of gratitude. "Great Khan, please don't call me uncle. In front of you, I'm just an ordinary general." What are you saying, uncle? We are of the same clan. Even if our bones are broken, our tendons are still connected. Not only are you my uncle now, but you will always be. As long as I, Bola, am the Khan of the Golden Horde, you will always be my uncle. Bo La's words were spoken with sincerity, and they came from the bottom of his heart. When Chiwen heard this, his eyes turned red, as if he was extremely touched. "If that's the case, then I'll thank you. But what business does the Khan have with uncle?" Chiwen's ego was so inflated that he would climb up as soon as he was given the chance. Bola was naturally very dissatisfied. In the past, he had his father above him, who had suppressed him for decades. Now, he wanted to be suppressed by an uncle. Of course, these were just thoughts in his heart. This was a critical moment, and internal strife could not be allowed. When dealing with talented people, one should be bold enough to use them and break free first. Thus, Bola cupped his fists and said respectfully, "Uncle, you've seen the current situation. The Sherkas and Allans are short-sighted and have abandoned us. Now that our strength has been greatly reduced, it will be difficult to fight the Han army outside the city. We can only think of a way to return to the city and find another way. But now that the road back to the city has been blocked, what should we do? Isn't that simple? Just kill whoever gets in the way. But rest assured, Great Khan, as long as I lead 50,000 elite cavalry, we will be able to enter the city in the blink of an eye and ensure your safety." Hearing this, Chiwen patted his own chest and spoke with assurance. "Do you need 50,000 men?" Bola asked doubtfully when he heard that he wanted the right to lead 50,000 cavalrymen. 50,000 is not possible. 30,000 is fine, but they must be elites. It would be best if they are the golden armored cavalry by the Khan's side. Otherwise, we need at least 50,000 people. Chiwen seemed to be afraid that Bola would be unhappy, so he took a step back and said, 30,000 people would be reduced to 50,000, and 20,000 of them would be his golden armored cavalry. This made Bola's eyes reveal a difficult expression. Seeing that he didn't get a definite answer and wasn't rejected, Chiwen knew that there was room for discussion. He immediately said, "Great Khan, we can't wait any longer. Now that we have suffered a great defeat, the morale of the army is unstable. If we use ordinary troops, it will take a long time to raise the number of soldiers. Once the Han army completes the encirclement, we won't have the chance to break out. Therefore, I ask Great Khan to make a decision as soon as possible." Chiwen's urging clearly had some effect. When Bola heard it, his hesitant face couldn't help but become more resolute. Recalling that the golden armored cavalry was an existence similar to his imperial guards, he decided to temporarily hand them over to Chiwen. He only needed to give an order and they would return to his side. In that case, the other party only had 10,000 ordinary cavalry. They wouldn't be able to cause any big waves. After thinking for a while and not seeing any problems, Bola finally said, "Fine, since that is the case, I will leave this matter to Uncle. At the very least, we must open the gates tomorrow morning and let the army in. Otherwise, I'm afraid we won't have any chance." "Don't worry, I promise to open the gates tomorrow morning and invite the Great Khan into the city." Seeing that Bola had agreed, Chiwen made a promise. Soon, the tiger troop talisman was in his hand, and Chiwen's anxious expression also calmed down. There was one thing that Chiwen had never mentioned to anyone. Not only was he feared by Khan Mahama because of his outstanding ability, but more importantly, his wife was once taken by Mahama because of her beauty. Mahama then snatched her away for a night. Chapter 1458. Things like this were not rare in the Mongolian upper echelons. Even a father sleeping with his son's wife had happened before. But the strange thing was that Chiwen's wife was a woman with a strong temperament. With the idea that a good woman does not serve a second husband, she hanged herself that night before leaving Chiwen's Great Khan's tent. The next day, what was delivered to Chiwen's hands was only a corpse that was still a little warm. Chiwen and his wife could be said to be deeply in love. After a night of duty, how could he not be angry when he saw such a scene when he returned home? However, he was a shrewd person. He knew that it was impossible for him to fight against Mahama with his strength. Not to mention revenge, he was afraid that he would be captured before he could even enter the Great Khan's golden tent. It was from then on that hatred was buried in his heart. It must be said that Mahama was a cautious person. After seeing that Chiwen did not make a fuss, he always felt that something was wrong. From then on, he began to guard against him. However, because Chiwen was indeed a good fighter and there was no evidence that Chiwen wanted to harm him, he did not make a move. However, he also did not let Chiwen take control of the military. At most, he only had 1,000 soldiers. Because it was a scandal, Mahama did not tell his son the truth. He only said that Chiwen was too strong. If he took control of the military, he was afraid that something bad would happen to the Great Khan. However, no one would have thought that a cannonball would suddenly take Mahama's life. As a result, he did not have time to tell his son many things before he died. Now that Chiwen had finally taken control of the military, could he still continue to endure? Thinking of Bola's reluctant expression when he took the tiger tally, Chiwen knew that he could not wait any longer. Otherwise, he really did not know if there would be a next time. Since that was the case, he decided to take action tonight. However, before that, he needed to send out the 20,000 golden armored cavalry. As long as this army was not protecting the golden tent, no one would be an obstacle on his way forward. Of course, there was one more thing that he had to do, and that was to surrender to the Han army. Yes, Chiwen had made the decision to surrender to the Han army. During the day, he had witnessed the power of the five-star army's firearms and was shocked. He had seen Russia's firearms before, but their power was limited. If he were to compare them to the five-star army, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that the difference was like heaven and earth. How could the Golden Horde be a match for such an army? Chiwen was prepared to surrender even before he obtained the tiger tally. However, considering that he only had 1,000 cavalrymen, even if he brought them over, they wouldn't attract too much attention. Now that he had 30,000 cavalrymen in his hands, and most importantly, Bola's safety was in his hands. This meant that he had enough capital to do what he wanted to do. After pondering for a while, Chiwen called for a bodyguard and whispered into his ear, "Make your preparations. Go out as soon as the sky turns dark. Find a way to find General Gray and personally hand this letter to him." "Yes," the guard replied. He carefully put the letter into his pocket, then turned around and left. This bodyguard had followed him for more than 10 years and had witnessed his glory and decline. Naturally, he knew Gray, who was originally one of the generals of the Golden Horde. Chiwen was very relieved to have this bodyguard take care of things. After arranging this matter, he sighed and said, "Next, We have to go to the Golden Horde camp. This sigh expressed Qi Wen's feelings perfectly. It was said that no egg would remain intact when the nest was overturned. In order to take revenge for his own personal grudge, he had to sacrifice the entire Golden Horde. He couldn't bear to do so. However, if he didn't do so, he wouldn't be able to take revenge. Since Mahama was already dead, he might as well vent all his hatred on Bo Law. Since that was the case, he had to repay his father's debt. Moreover, judging from what happened just now, the other party did not believe in him. Everything was done out of helplessness. Once he really killed his way back to New Salai City this time, he was afraid that he would be hidden very quickly. Even being killed was not impossible. From what Qi Wen knew, Bola was even worse than Mahama. He was even more unforgiving. When he thought about how he was doing this for his own life, the guilt in his heart lessened. At this moment, Qi Wen was thinking about whether his actions could gain the favor of the Han army. After all, he still had to live after surrendering, and he wanted to live a better life. No matter what, this could be considered a meritorious service. He just didn't know how great this service would be. Qi Wen was worried about how great the service would be. In his opinion, even if he didn't do anything, the Golden Horde cavalry, whose morale was already low, wouldn't be a match for the Han army, whose morale was high. The only difference was that they would have more time and losses. However, when the sky turned dark, his personal guards found the tent of the Han army and asked for their identities. When they were brought to General Gray, he was extremely excited after reading the letter that Qi Wen had personally written. He said on the spot, "If this is really the case, your general has made a great contribution to our cause. How about this, wait for a while. I will ask for instructions from the higher-ups." Gray had reason to be excited. As a surrendered general, he also needed the support of military service, and the more the better. Gray's performance had been very good recently. He had successfully persuaded Heir Hihi and 6 or 7 other small tribes to bring in nearly 30,000 surrendered soldiers. This already made Yang Chendong very satisfied. However, he used to be one of the 2 generals of the Golden Horde. His power could be said to be monstrous. If he wanted to continue the glory of that time, he needed to make more military contributions. But when he was fighting alongside the new Second Army, it was easier said than done to make any great contributions. Just as Gray was thinking about what to do, Qi Wen's letter arrived. It was really a case of someone sending a pillow when he was sleepy. Gray instructed the bodyguard who delivered the letter and hurriedly rode to the main tent a few miles away. As the leader of the Yangxie, Yang Chendong's main tent could not be too close to the Mongolian army. Even though the Mongolian army had surrendered and was transforming into the 5-star army, he would not do any experiments. He would not stay with the surrendered Mongolian cavalry. On the contrary, he was surrounded by the Black Cavalry. The Cold Vanguard 2nd Division was on the outside. Under their protection, he was very safe. Even if someone wanted to attack him, they would not be able to get close. The sky was getting darker. Yang Chendong, who had been commanding the battle for the whole day, was not tired at all. Ever since he entered the Grandmaster realm, Yang Chendong's energy had become even more vigorous. He only needed to rest for about 4 hours every day to be 100 times more energetic. At this moment, he was standing in front of the sand table. His mind was wandering. The Golden Horde had clearly prepared for this battle. They had set up a battlefield that was more than 10 miles long and 40 miles wide to the west of New Salai City. After all, if there was not enough space for hundreds of thousands of cavalry, they would not be able to display their strength. The Golden Horde had already set up the battlefield and was waiting for Yang Chendong to arrive. At that time, they would use their cavalry to tell the Han army that in such a spacious place, the so-called firearms would be laughable in the face of hundreds of thousands of cavalry. They would not be able to withstand a single blow. It had to be said that this train of thought was correct. If they were to use such a formation to deal with the Ras Duchy, it would be hard to say if they would dare to fight in such a place. However, in Yang Chendong's eyes, things were completely different. With the great canopy in hand, the world was his. With the powerful firearms that were hundreds of years ahead of this era, the open land was a paradise for cavalry. How could it not be the world of firearms? Thus, the Golden Horde, who did not understand the five-star army, paid a heavy price. In just one day, Great Khan Mahama had died in battle. The 200,000 allied troops had all fled. A few small tribes under the Golden Horde's command had surrendered. They had lost more than 150,000 soldiers. The results of the day's battle were so glorious that it was beyond Yang Chendong's expectations. He originally thought that it would take at least a few days for a battle like this to end. However, it was the other party's ignorance that made the outcome of the battle clear. It was dark. Even though the battle at the front lines was progressing smoothly, Yang Chendong still gave the order to stop the attack. First of all, the soldiers were tired after a day of fighting. They would not be able to perform well if they did not have a good rest. Second of all, it was too dark, which made it easier for the enemy to escape. Since he had come this time, he wanted to solve this problem once and for all. Yang Chendong did not want this battle to drag on for another 3 to 5 years. His time was limited. In 3 days, they had captured more than 100,000 captives. These people needed to be settled down. Otherwise, if there was a battle at the front lines and problems at the rear, it would be a huge joke. Yang Chendong gave the order to stop the attack. This was equivalent to giving the Golden Horde a chance to breathe. However, it was only for one night. The attack would continue tomorrow morning. Given another day, most of the battle would be resolved. The success of the battle left Yang Chendong in a good mood. However, he still came to the sand table out of habit to do one last analysis. He was switching roles. If he were bowler, what would he do? No matter how he thought about it, he could only think of one possibility. He would charge back to New Salai and rely on the city walls to defend. However, Yang Chendong wasn't worried at all about this. Not to mention that he had already made preparations and arranged for people to guard the city gates, even if they could really do it. So what? With the field artillery, wouldn't sieging the city be a piece of cake? Chapter 1459. Furthermore, the strength of the Mongol cavalry lay in their mobility. They moved quickly and came and went like the wind. Once they returned to the city and started the battle to defend the city, it was equivalent to giving up their greatest advantage. Such an opponent was like a tiger without its fangs. What was there to be afraid of? Once again, after confirming that it was difficult for the other party to have any backup plans, Yang Chendong stretched lazily. Then, he said to Captain Chiu Vi beside him, "Get ready. We're going to patrol the barracks." Beta Persei was tired from commanding the cannons during the day. Just shouting the cannons made his voice hoarse. At this time, he had already gone to rest. Chiu Vi followed and served him. After hearing Yang Chendong's instructions, he quickly replied, "Yes, I'll make the arrangements now." Patrolling the barracks was one of Yang Chendong's good habits. After fighting for an entire day, the soldiers were very tired. Some of the recruits even developed psychological problems or were tired of fighting because it was their first time killing someone. At this time, it was very necessary to meet with them, encourage them, and promise them a beautiful future. After this matter was settled, these soldiers could quickly recover their mental state. Tomorrow, they would become elite soldiers and achieve even more outstanding achievements. Chiu Vi was making the arrangements when Vice Captain Ba Daojiang walked over. Sixth young master, General Gray said that he has something important to discuss with you. It was already so late. If there wasn't something important, Gray would definitely not appear here. After hearing this, Yang Chendong's expression turned solemn. "Let him in." Gray lowered his head and entered the tent. When he saw Yang Chendong sitting in front of the large chair, he knelt on the ground. He was a surrendered general and had to abide by some rules. Not seeing his master represented a form of respect in his heart. Yang Chendong saw Gray's performance and praised him for knowing when to advance and retreat. "All right, raise your head. You did well in today's battle. Come, have a seat." Over the years, Yang Chendong had gained a better understanding of people's hearts. He was increasingly clear about what to say and what to do. Gray was extremely excited when he heard that his performance was not bad and that he would be given a seat. He immediately kowtowed to the ground and said, "Heavenly Khan, your subordinate has something important to report, so I won't be sitting down." This is a letter from General Chiwen of the Golden Horde. Please take a look. As he spoke, he raised his hands respectfully. There was a letter in his hands. Ba Daojiang hurriedly looked at Yang Chendong. After receiving his approval, he took 3 steps forward and picked up the letter. He first checked it, and after confirming that there were no problems, he extended both hands and handed it to Yang Chendong. Yang Chendong reached out and quickly scanned through the contents of the letter. Then he asked, "Who is this Qi Wen?" Reporting to the Heavenly Khan, Qi Wen is one of Genghis Khan's descendants. However, because his ancestors are not prominent, he is not very famous. However, Qi Wen is indeed of the same race as Mahama and the others. Not only that, he is also a general who is good at fighting. If not for the suspicion and suppression, he would be listed among the generals of the Golden Horde. Gray, who was kneeling on the ground, used the shortest words to describe Qi Wen's situation. He had heard a legend about the death of Mahama and Qi Wen's wife. At that time, he was serving under Mahama's Golden Horde and was the general leading the team. It was because of this relationship that he had heard some of the secrets. The circle of nobles is really messy. This was Yang Chendong's first reaction after hearing the story. However, he quickly returned to normal and asked, "If that's the case, Qi Wen has a grudge with Mahama and his son." Yes, this matter started more than 10 years ago. It couldn't have been planned in advance, Gray explained. He wanted to use this opportunity to explain that no one would plan for a matter more than 10 years in advance. Furthermore, at that time, no one would have thought that the powerful Golden Horde would one day be destroyed by the Han army. Yang Chendong naturally understood this and nodded. "That's right. So, you believe in Qi Wen?" "Yes, your subordinate believes in him." At this time, Gray had no other choice. Since he came to deliver the letter, it proved that he believed in Qi Wen first. Otherwise, why would he ask to see Qi Wen now? "Yes, since that's the case, I'll leave this matter to you. If you need anyone to cooperate with you, feel free to ask. How about this, Ba Daojiang, you will follow Gray's left and right generals. If you need any help, you can coordinate." Yang Chendong thought for a moment and gave his answer. In his opinion, it was naturally best if Qi Wen could sincerely surrender. It would save a lot of effort and casualties. If Qi Wen wanted to make any moves, it wouldn't matter. At most, they would launch an attack earlier. At the very least, arranging Ba Daojiang by Gray's side was naturally to guard against Qi Wen. The way to use people was to use people with suspicion, and use people with suspicion. One definitely couldn't completely trust anyone, and shouldn't casually suspect others without evidence. If this matter is done well, General Gray will have made a great contribution. Even Qi Wen will have made a great contribution. This Khan can consider letting you lead an army alone in the future. If you want a horse to run, you want it to eat grass. Yang Chendong was never stingy when it came to delegating power. However, the prerequisite was that Gray had won his trust and had made enough contributions. Upon hearing that he still had the opportunity to lead an army, the kneeling Gray's face instantly turned red. Immediately, he started to kowtow to the ground. "Thank you for your trust, Heavenly Khan. Please watch my actions." Gray's face turned red. As a surrendered general, it would be a good ending if he didn't get punished. Even better, it would be extremely fortunate if he could become a rich man and live until he died. As for being trusted by a new lord and being given military power, it wasn't that this had never happened before. It was just that it was extremely rare. Gray was still in his prime and wasn't even 40 years old. If he retired now, it would be somewhat regretful. This was especially so after seeing the power of the 5-star Army's firearms. He wanted to make use of this opportunity to make more contributions. This way, he would be able to obtain more when he retired. It could be said that a second spring had already sprouted in his heart. If he could lead an army alone, it would be better for him to complete his dreams and plans. Yang Chendong's words had also scratched Gray's itch. This could be seen from how his forehead quickly turned red as he knelt down and kowtowed to the ground devoutly. "All right, you don't have to kneel here. This Khan wants to see the results. Go and make the arrangements." Yang Chendong waved his hand. He didn't admire someone like Gray from the bottom of his heart. After all, he was a traitor. However, the Golden Horde was extremely powerful. Even if he defeated them, it would be extremely difficult to be used by them. However, with someone like Gray, things would be different. They were originally the generals of the Mongolian cavalry. If they could fully cooperate with him, he would be able to achieve twice the results with half the effort. This was the reason why Yang Chendong promised Gray that he could lead an army. Of course, there was a prerequisite for all of this. Even if Gray was to lead an army, he had to be under his nose. Only then would he be able to take action in the shortest time and minimize the losses if things went wrong. Of course, the possibility of this happening was very low. After all, he had already betrayed his master once. If Gray did this again, no one would dare to believe him. Gray quickly stood up and bowed towards Yang Chendong's seat. Then he walked out of the tent accompanied by Ba Daojiang. Gray was still very satisfied with this late-night visit. After getting Yang Chendong's promise, he was full of energy. As for having Ba Daojiang by his side, he wasn't worried at all. Instead, he was happy. He originally didn't have any intention of betraying Yang Chendong. Now that there was someone following him, he could see all of his efforts and report back to Yang Chendong. Wouldn't that be a good thing? Gray quickly rode back to the main camp. When he saw the personal guard sent by Qi Wen, Gray made a promise. He said that as long as Qi Wen performed well, not only would the safety of himself and his family in New Sarai City not be a problem, he would also be rewarded greatly. After the personal guard received the promise, he left the camp and returned to Qi Wen's place. He reported everything that he had seen and heard. Good, you did well. Go and receive your reward. Qi Wen's face was filled with excitement. Just now, he had arranged for 2 golden armored cavalry to leave the main camp and head towards the west gate of New Salai. Without these people, the defense of Bowler's golden tent would be useless. He could do whatever he wanted. Men, gather 500 Qi soldiers and follow me. Qi Wen knew that this was a serious matter. Naturally, he would not easily trust others. Therefore, he decided not to use other soldiers. He only arranged the 10,000 cavalrymen that should be under his command to the periphery to prevent others from spying on the golden tent. The ones who went with him to capture Bola were all his family generals. Some of them had followed him for more than 10 years, so there was no problem with their reliability. In the golden tent, although it was getting late, Bowler didn't fall asleep. He just lay on the bed with his eyes closed. All in all, too many things had happened in one day. First, his father was killed, and then he succeeded the throne. Then, Shamask and Mao Lahong escaped, and the defeat of the soldiers in front of him, and now he was trapped. If he could go back in time to a day ago, Bowler would never have dared to imagine that such things would happen. Now it had happened. It was true that life was full of ups and downs. He was now the Khan. As long as he could safely return to New Salai, once the reinforcements from the Ras Duchy arrived, it was possible to force the Han army to retreat. When that time came, he would work hard to recuperate. Once he was strong enough, he would first deal with the Churkas and Alans. Then he would destroy the Ras Duchy. Finally, he would point his troops at the Han territory. He wanted to let these people know how terrible the consequences of angering him were. Chapter 1460. Thinking of these things, Bo La unknowingly fell asleep. After an unknown amount of time, a burst of shouting came from outside. Only then did he slowly open his eyes and see a sharp curved blade against his neck. The person holding the blade was Qi Wen. At this moment he was looking at Bo La with a smile, his eyes full of playfulness and mockery. "Clan uncle?" Seeing Qi Wen sitting on his bed, Bo La couldn't help but be startled. He was the great Khan. Without his permission, how could anyone get close to him? As soon as he felt the cold sensation on his neck, he immediately woke up. "Hee, you're still calling me clan uncle. You're really kind-hearted. But do you think I'll believe you so easily? I'm afraid that once we safely return to the city, you'll kill this clan uncle of mine," Qi Wen said with a fake smile. At the same time, his right hand exerted a bit of force, and the tip of the blade pierced his skin, causing blood to seep out. Feeling the coldness and killing intent that could go berserk at any time, Bo La, who originally wanted to resist, immediately became well-behaved. He knew this clan uncle of his. Although he wasn't a match for 10,000 people in terms of skills, he was far from being able to defeat him. Now that the blade was against his neck, if he made a mistake, he could injure himself. Having just become the great Khan, Bo La, who viewed his life as extremely important, wouldn't easily take such a risk. At this moment he slowly raised his hands and made an expression that said he wouldn't resist or play any tricks. "Clan uncle, why are you doing this? Your nephew really believes in you. Otherwise, I wouldn't have handed over the military power to you." "Yes, you want to use me. Use my commanding ability and bravery to kill a path of blood and ensure that you enter the city, isn't that right?" "Speaking of using people, you and your father are the same. You and your father also don't easily trust others. Otherwise, you wouldn't be unaware of the hatred between me and your father, and wouldn't trust me so much. Haha, isn't that right?" When he thought about how his beloved wife had been played to death by Ma, the expression on Qi Wen's face became slightly ferocious. Indeed, Mahama hadn't told Bo La about his grudge with Qi Wen. Perhaps Bo La also felt that he had done something wrong and had lost face. In addition, his body was fine, so he only needed to know about this matter. If he really couldn't do it, he would just kill Qi Wen. But who would have thought that the accident would come so suddenly? This time, he had left first, leaving behind his son who didn't know the truth. He had even put Qi Wen in an important position, so it was reasonable that he would end up like this. Even after Qi Wen said all this, Bo La was still confused. He still couldn't understand why this uncle of his would betray him so easily. Could it be that he had given himself away in some way that made him feel that he couldn't be trusted? However, it was useless to think about this now. Since things had reached this point, the first thing he wanted to do was to survive. Then he would see if he could convince Qi Wen and take the opportunity to escape. As long as he could leave, he swore that he would send a large number of troops to deal with Qi Wen and let him know the consequences of betraying him. Even though he had an idea in his mind, Bo La still looked very obedient on the surface. "Uncle, is there some misunderstanding? Tell me, and I will explain it to you." "No need." Qi Wen interrupted him. "What you need to do now is to be obedient and immediately hand over all your tiger troop talismans. Then you can still keep your life. Otherwise, I won't kill you. I will only cut off your legs and make you a complete cripple." Haha, the Rossi Kingdom's blind Grand Duke, and the Golden Tribe's blind Great Khan. I think it will be a good story. Qi Wen was still laughing, but there wasn't a trace of joy on Bo La's face. On the contrary, he was afraid from the bottom of his heart. As a horse race, without legs meant that he would never be able to gallop on a warhorse. What was the difference between that and a cripple? If that was the case, it would be better for him to die. As for handing over all his tiger troop talismans, that was also impossible. Once he did that, it would be the same as handing over all his military power. What was the difference between that and death? Unsurprisingly, Bo La shook his head. The tiger troop talisman is the symbol of the Great Khan's reign. I will never hand it over. Oh? Is that so? If that's the case, then let's search. Qi Wen seemed to have expected this result. His voice rose a little. Soon, 6 bodyguards walked in and began searching the golden tent. The tiger troop talisman was an extremely important item. How could it be found so easily? No matter how hard they searched, they couldn't find a trace of it. Qi Wen's expression was somewhat ugly. He looked at Bo La, who looked like he couldn't hit him. He could only hatefully say, "If that's the case, then cut off his legs." The turn of events was so fast that Bo La was caught off guard. Seeing the 2 bodyguards walk over with knives, Bo La's expression was no longer calm. He cried out in alarm, "No, no, I'll give you the tiger troop talisman." Compared to losing his legs immediately, Bo La had to do his best. So he chose to back down. Qi Wen finally turned around and said, "Very good. As long as you cooperate, you will be fine. Now tell me where the tiger troop talisman is." "In the Great Khan's residence in the city," Bo La said with a pale face. "The Great Khan's residence? Are you messing with me?" Qi Wen's face was filled with disbelief when he heard this answer. How could I lie at a time like this? Father died too suddenly. Many of the Tiger Troop talismans haven't been handed over to me yet. Bo La's face was ashen as he spoke. He was telling the truth. After all, this wasn't a normal handover. Everything was filled with too many accidents. Qi Wen carefully looked at Bo La and chose to believe him. Since that was the case, he didn't stay any longer. Instead, he looked at the 6 bodyguards in the tent and said, "Watch him. If he dares to shout or move, kill him. There's no need to be lenient." With that, Qi Wen walked out of the tent. His brows were tightly furrowed. He knew that things weren't going as smoothly as he had planned. Without the Tiger Troop talisman, he could only visit them one by one. He only hoped that he would be able to make it in time for daybreak. Qi Wen began to wander around the various camps, choosing a few familiar people of high status to talk to. Since he didn't have the Tiger Troop talisman, he could only talk to them one by one. Holding the jade pendant he had taken from Bo La, he began to frequently enter the various camps. Qi Wen didn't choose to rest for the entire night. Instead, he went to 7 main tents and met with 8 generals. What made him happy was that when he told them the purpose of his visit and showed them the jade pendant that Bo La always carried with him, everything went smoothly. Other than one of the generals who said that he would not give up resistance without the Great Khan's tiger seal, the other 6 generals all said that they would wait until tomorrow morning to make a decision. If the Great Khan really made the decision to surrender to the Han army, they would not oppose it and would even support it. After all, the Han army had given them too much pressure in the battle during the day, so much so that they felt powerless. It was better to just surrender. At least they could keep their lives. This was also because the Mongol army was afraid of the 5-star army. The cannons that seemed to be everywhere, the explosions that could land by their ears at any moment, and the endless fireballs that rushed forward made the Mongol cavalry unable to see any hope of victory. However, due to the strict hierarchy, without the Great Khan giving the order to retreat, no one dared to leave. Sometimes, even if they knew that they would die, they could only go forward. Now, with Qi Wen's explanation, everyone had a way out. Although they had the Great Khan's tiger talisman in their hands, the reason they gave was very normal. Muhammad Great Khan had suddenly died, and the tiger talisman was still in the city, so they did not have time to take it out. Furthermore, Qi Wen had said that he was following the orders of the new Great Khan, Bo La, speaking of which, he was the uncle of the new Great Khan. Could his words not be trusted? Of course, the main reason why everyone believed him was because they were willing to believe him. As long as they were willing, there would be no doubts. Even if there were doubts, they would be ignored. This made Qi Wen's action of surrendering extremely easy. It was so smooth that it exceeded his expectations. When the sun had just risen, his army of 150,000 had basically chosen to give up on resisting. When the sun rose, Qi Wen finally met with General Gray. After Qi Wen explained the situation, Gray was extremely happy. "Good, General Qi Wen. You have done a great service this time. I will definitely recommend you to the Great Khan. Now, let's discuss how to deal with the 20,000 gold-armored cavalry." Anyone could surrender, but without orders, the gold-armored cavalry would not easily surrender. Their status was equivalent to the Black Knights and Dragon Guards of the Yang faction. They enjoyed the best treatment and were also the personal guards of the Great Khan. Because they were usually treated well, they were all very strong and their fighting strength could not be underestimated. When it came to dealing with the 20,000 gold-armored cavalry, Qi Wen's face was filled with helplessness. It was not a problem for him to persuade others, but it was too difficult to persuade the gold-armored cavalry to put down their weapons. It could even be said that it was an impossible task. Seeing the difficult expression on Qi Wen's face, Gray chuckled. "Since we can't persuade them to surrender, we'll leave it to the Great Khan. We'll do it like this later." Gray had received a message from Yang Chendong early in the morning. The matter of the 20,000 gold-armored cavalry would be handed to him personally. If there was a cavalry that Yang Chendong valued the most in the entire Golden Horde, it would be the 20,000 gold-armored cavalry. Chapter 1461. The strong were always respected. Yang Chendong was no exception. He was also curious about the famed golden armored cavalry. If they were really as powerful as the legend said, he would try to convince them to submit to him. With such a strong army, it would be a good thing for his strength. While everyone was scheming against the golden armored cavalry, the 20,000 golden armored cavalry were still foolishly waiting in front of New Sarai. According to their previous agreement, they had to find a way to open the city gates at night, opening a door for the Khan to retreat. And this matter was handed over to General Qi Wen. However, the night passed just like that, and he did not see anyone come to give him orders. This made General Wu Shugu very puzzled. When the sky brightened and he finally saw his surroundings, he could not help but turn pale with fright. Around the golden armored cavalry, there were soldiers holding Han army banners. They were surrounded. Wu Shugu's face instantly became gloomy and terrifying. At this time, he finally understood that he had been betrayed by Qi Wen. When he thought about how Khan Bola would be without his protection, he could not help but feel anxious. Everyone gather and prepare to charge. Wu Shugu was worthy of being a golden armored general. He quickly made the decision to charge out and meet up with the Khan. For this, even if they had to pay a heavy price, they had to do it. This was the mission of the golden armored cavalry. After the order was given, the 20,000 golden armored cavalry quickly gathered in formation, ready to charge at any time. At this time, the 5-star army that surrounded them also changed. The soldiers of the 2nd Division of the Cold Vanguard rushed over, and so did the Black Cavalry. Even Yang Chendong personally rushed over. When he saw that the golden armored cavalry that was surrounded in the middle had already begun to form up, and there was no sign of panic on their faces, he could not help but exclaim, "They're really elites." True elites would naturally be able to remain calm in the face of danger and not panic in the face of danger. Many times, even when they were left with only 10% of their men, they could still charge and inflict heavy damage to their opponents. This was true elites. For example, the Black Cavalry could do this. In comparison, the 20,000 golden armored cavalrymen in front of him were not bad either. Yang Chendong had to admit that he only had 2,000 Black Cavalry with him, while the Golden Horde had 20,000 elite soldiers. This was the strength of the foundation. It was not something that could be achieved through hard work. "Young master, let me test their capabilities." Beta Persei had already put on a black armor and walked in front of Yang Chendong. It was as if he had a pair of dog noses. Once there was a battle, he would always be the first to appear and think of a way to participate in the battle. As a matter of fact, when he saw the powerful golden armored cavalry, he left the artillery position and rushed over. Yang Chendong was just about to test the strength of these golden armored cavalry when Beta Persei rushed over. Thinking about how this person had followed him for so many years, there was nothing to say about his bravery. Coupled with the protection of his black armor, ordinary people would not be able to hurt him. He nodded and said, "I'll give you 200 black cavalry. Remember to be careful. If you can't do it, retreat." Yang Chendong agreed. Beta Persei was naturally very excited. He immediately nodded in agreement. Soon after, he gathered 200 black cavalry dragon guards and leaped forward, heading towards the golden armored cavalry that was surrounded. Beta Persei's voice was not much worse than a loudspeaker. When he was 300 meters away from the golden armored cavalry, he began to shout loudly. The general idea was that he had long heard of the golden armored cavalry's prowess, but he believed that the rumors were false. This time, he brought 200 black cavalry to experience it. This was the so-called challenge. If it was under normal circumstances, the golden armored cavalry would naturally ignore it. But now, they were already surrounded and had no other choice. Seeing that the enemy had sent out 200 cavalrymen, Wu Shuge hesitated for a moment, then also ordered 200 cavalrymen to go forward. Wu Shugu naturally had his own plans. He had already thought it through. Once the 200 cavalrymen gained the upper hand and defeated the Han army, he would take advantage of the momentum to charge forward. As for whether the golden armored cavalry could win, Wu Shugu was not worried. At the very least, ever since he became a golden armored general, he had never met any cavalrymen who were a match for him in a one-on-one situation. The other party accepted the challenge and Beta Persei laughed heartily. Good, since you've agreed to my request, if you want to surrender when you're no match for me, I'll promise to spare your lives. Ha! Beta Persei's bold laughter rang in the ears of the golden-armored cavalry and caused their eyes to spit fire. Since he dared to look down on the golden-armored cavalry, they would use facts to speak for themselves and teach this arrogant Han general a lesson. The black cavalry also looked at the 200 golden-armored cavalry with angry gazes. The black cavalry had always been synonymous with the strongest cavalry. Even the current number 1 cavalry army in the world had to admit this point. But now, there was actually a cavalry that dared to call themselves the king of cavalry. How could they accept this? The strong were all proud and no one wanted to admit that they were inferior to others. So at this moment, they were also holding back their strength and wanted to perform well. Everyone listen up. When you attack later, don't hold back. These opponents are not simple. It's time to show the might of the black cavalry. Come, let's use the 3-3 formation and the arrow formation. Although Beta Persei laughed arrogantly, he was still very cautious. Since the golden-armored cavalry was praised by many people, they must not be ordinary people. Even so, he certainly would not be careless. Beta Persei led the 200 black cavalry to attack first. 15 people formed an arrow formation and each formation was divided into 5 groups. They could fight in groups or one-on-one. This was the most common way of fighting for the black cavalry. A centurion of the golden-armored cavalry also shouted and led the 200 cavalry to launch a counterattack. Unlike the black cavalry, they were in groups of 50 and came in a square formation. Cavalry was different from infantry. Infantry could use their feet to control their position at will. Naturally, it was a simple matter to arrange them into a square formation. But cavalry was different. They relied on their warhorses. It was easier to form a square formation when moving, but to be able to maintain such a formation when charging at high speed was already not a simple matter. Not bad. Yang Chendong, who was standing in the distance, saw all of this and could not help but nod in satisfaction. Then he stared at the battlefield, not wanting to miss a single detail. He wanted to learn from the strengths of the golden-armored cavalry and see what he could learn from them. One of them took the form of a sharp arrow formation, while the other took the form of an overlapping square formation. The distance between the two sides was only 300 meters. In less than 10 breaths, they collided. The cavalry's speed advantage was not fully displayed. The reason why cavalry was known as the kings of the land before firearms were popular was because of their speed. Many times, they could use their high speed to display 10 times their strength. Often in high speed, a casual swing of their swords could quickly cut off the head of an infantry. But once the cavalry lost their speed advantage, their strength would be greatly reduced. Just like now, both sides could not display their speed. The moment they collided, they had to rely on their own brute force to suppress the opponent. To be able to become a golden-armored cavalry, they were usually treated well. In other words, they ate well. Compared to the sallow and emaciated bodies of the ordinary cavalry, they were all sturdy and muscular. Naturally, their strength was not weak either. So when they could not increase their speed and had to compete in strength, their eyes revealed a mocking expression. It was as if they were saying that they would definitely win if they competed in strength. But as the saying goes, there is always someone better. To be able to become a member of the Black Cavalry, not only did their loyalty have to be very reliable, their own strength was also quite good. For example, before entering this group, there was a special test for strength. A trial stone that weighed 60 pounds. Only those who could lift it with one arm were considered qualified. Their strength was not small to begin with. After becoming a member of the Black Knight Dragon Guards, not only did they eat good food, but they also ate very nutritious food, which allowed them to fully display their potential. In comparison, they were more than one level higher than the Golden Armored Cavalry in terms of foundation. So when it came to competing in strength, Beta Persei and the others' eyes lit up. Dang dang, ding ding, quang quang. When the collision began, both sides swung their swords confidently, hoping that the moment the other party's sword left their hands would appear. But unfortunately, this scene did not happen. What happened was that about 40 cavalrymen fell from their horses. Both sides were elites, so naturally, they would not easily let go of their weapons. So even if their strength was inferior, they did not throw their weapons away. Instead, they were brought to their horses by the tremendous force. As the saying goes, if the sword exists, the people exist. If the sword dies, the people die. Of course, the more than 40 people who fell from their horses were all golden armored cavalry, without exception. From this point of view, in terms of strength, the black cavalry was already superior. Hiss! When the centurion of the golden armored cavalry saw that the people who fell from their horses were his own soldiers, he could not help but gasp. No one knew better than him how powerful his soldiers were. But even so, they were still no match for these Han army's black cavalry. What kind of strength does the other party have? In the first round, the black cavalry won. After the two sides crossed each other, no one made a move. Instead, they looked at each other as if taking the opportunity to recharge their strength. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the golden armored cavalry who fell from their horses also quickly jumped back on their horses. Although some people still felt their arms trembling, it was obviously not easy for the strong to admit defeat so easily. Chapter 1462. The defeated golden armored cavalry mounted their horses again. Beta Persei did not stop them when he saw this. What he wanted to do was to completely trample the other party under his feet. He wanted to convince them wholeheartedly. Since he could knock the other party off their horses once, he could do it a second time and a third time. After about half a cup of tea's time, both sides launched a second charge at the same time. After the previous failure, the golden armored cavalry changed their attack method this time. Their cavalry phalanx also began to work. They actually charged at dozens of black cavalry with overlapping attacks. They gave up the opportunity to attack the other black cavalry. They only chose to fight behind some people with their swords, maintaining the power of the phalanx. Often, after the black cavalry fought with one person, before they were ready, the second person would come up and fight to the death. In this way, it was equivalent to one black cavalry continuously challenging more than 3 golden armored cavalry. In this way, their strength would inevitably be somewhat lacking. After fighting for a while, there were 4 black cavalry soldiers who fell off their horses with their swords. Looking at the golden armored cavalry, although 3 of them fell off their horses, it was obviously a reversal of the situation compared to the first round. The 4 black cavalry soldiers who fell off their horses had each fought with at least 5 enemy riders. Otherwise, they would not be so weak. After seeing the two sides pass each other, the 3 golden armored cavalry who fell off their horses got back on their horses again. The 4 black cavalry soldiers also wanted to follow suit. But they were stopped by Beta Persei. "You all retreat first, go back and rest well." Beta Persei gave the 4 of them a comforting look. This was not because their skills were inferior, but because the golden armored cavalry had violated the rules of the battlefield. These 4 people just happened to be unlucky. Even if it was someone else in their position, they would not be able to withstand it. The black cavalry's military rules were quite strict. Since Beta Persei said so, the 4 of them had to obey even if they were somewhat dissatisfied. Immediately, he cupped his fists and left the battlefield. Seeing the 4 of them rush back, Yang Chendong said to Captain Qiu Vi, "Go and comfort them. This battle wasn't their fault." Qiu Vi was touched and nodded. Although he could see that these 4 warriors were not weaker than others, they were just unlucky to have been targeted. However, a defeat was a defeat. If he was punished for this, there was nothing he could say. However, now that Yang Chendong had asked him to comfort them, it was obvious that he did not blame the 4 of them. Not only were they not reprimanded after losing the battle, but they were also personally comforted by the 6th young master. Obviously, these 4 people would be fine. As the captain, Qiu Vi was touched and happy to see Yang Chendong care for the soldiers so much. The 4 dismounted black cavalry soldiers were sent back. When the centurion of the golden armored cavalry saw this, his expression was a little unnatural. It was no wonder. After his soldiers fell off their horses, they could get back on their horses and fight again. However, the opponents took the initiative to retreat after falling off their horses. No matter how he looked at it, they were at a disadvantage. In fact, the centurion of the golden armored cavalry misunderstood. The reason why Beta Persei let the four of them rest was because they were all injured. They would not be able to do much if they continued fighting. Since that was the case, it was better to be magnanimous this time. Not only could he ensure their safety, but he could also show his righteousness. It was the best of both worlds. Come, let's fight again. Beta Persei saw that half a cup of tea's time had passed and shouted without holding back. He had no intention of changing his strategy. This development was due to his confidence in the celestial sword in his hand. He firmly believed that if they continued to fight like this, the other party's scimitar would break sooner or later. Then it would be time for them to win. True combat strength did not only refer to a person's bravery, courage, and fear of death. It was also one of the criteria for measuring the quality of one's luck and equipment. It was precisely because of this confidence that Beta Persei dared to continue fighting like this. The Black Cavalry had no intention of changing their strategy and continued to be tired out by the overlapping tactics of the Golden Armored Cavalry. After 3 consecutive rounds, another 16 Black Cavalry fell off their horses and withdrew from the battle. As a result, the Golden Armored Cavalry's strength increased by 20 people. No matter how one looked at it, they seemed to have the upper hand. The centurion who led the team this time had a confident smile on his face. Even Wu Shugu, who was at the back of the team, was laughing loudly as if he had already won. He was just waiting for the results of the battle to expand so that he could find an opportunity to break through. Yang Er, who had once again pulled his horse back, laughed heartily. During the battle, he had carefully observed his opponent's scimitar. There were already cracks on it. As expected of a golden armored cavalry, the quality of the scimitar was very good. If it were an ordinary cavalry, it would have already been broken into 2 pieces. Fight one more time, an opportunity will appear. Everyone, get ready. Beta Persei whispered in a voice that only the people around him could hear. Then the soldiers passed the order to each other. Everyone who received the order had a confident expression on their faces at this moment. Charge! After the centurion of the golden armored cavalry shouted, he took the initiative to attack. Charge, try not to kill. Beta Persei's shout came immediately. He was also the first person to rush out on his horse. Compared to the previous few times, the morale of the Black Cavalry was much higher this time. They also knew that it was time to reap the fruits of their labor, so they used a little more force when they attacked. The golden armored cavalry did not know the power of the celestial sword. In fact, they did not have the opportunity to fight with the 5-star army in close combat. They still arranged themselves in a square formation like the previous 2 times, wanting to use overlapping sword techniques to knock down a few people from the 5-star army. Facts also proved that good luck would not always cover one side. When the 2 sides fought again, after the saber and scimitar collided, a scene that the golden armored cavalry could not imagine happened. During the collision, the body of the scimitar broke into 2 halves. Half of the sword that was originally more than 3 feet long was now cut off, leaving only the body of the sword that was still in the hands of the golden armored cavalry. The sudden scene caught the golden armored cavalrymen off guard. Under the overlapping technique, their scimitars were cut in half one after another. Without their scimitars, they screamed in agony as they faced the oncoming Black Cavalry Dragon Guards. Although Beta Persei said to try not to kill, and the Black Cavalry did indeed hold back, under the great force and the sharpness of the celestial sword, the scimitars still fell on the bodies of the golden armored cavalry. However, the scimitars were not in critical positions. In the end, they only injured the golden armored cavalry but did not kill them. One by one, the golden armored cavalry fell from their horses. Even the centurion was slashed by Beta Persei under his ribs, and a half-foot-long wound appeared. It was so painful that he could no longer hold the reins of his horse and fell to the ground. Capture them all. At least 3/4 of the 200 golden armored cavalry who were showing off just now had their weapons cut off and fell to the ground, becoming captives of the Black Cavalry. The remaining less than 50 people turned and fled. At this moment, The general of the golden armored cavalry, Wuxia, was about to lead the army and charge over to save the captured soldiers. In his eyes, every golden armored cavalry was a precious treasure that could not fall into the hands of the enemy. Fire! Xiao Feng, the commander of the 2nd Division of the Cold Front, had been watching from the side. He had just received instructions from Yang Chendong to fire at any time if something went wrong. Now that he saw the golden armored cavalry disregarding the rules, he could not help but sneer. Then, a company of Cold Front soldiers pulled the trigger and bullets fell at the feet of the golden armored cavalry who were about to charge over, forcing them to stay still. They're just SOS. They're too weak compared to the Black Cavalry. Even if they were to compete with the 1st Cavalry Division, if they had the same number of people, they would still lose without a doubt. Beta Persei had already retreated to the center of the army and came to Yang Chendong to express his thoughts. Okay. Yang Chendong was waiting for the result of this evaluation. Since the other party's strength was mediocre, they could not be allowed to live. Wuxia watched as more than 100 of his brothers were captured by the Han army. Naturally, his face was filled with anxiety. He looked at the divine weapons in the hands of the Black Cavalry with envy and resentment. At this moment, how could he not know that the reason why the enemy could win was because of the weapons? If the golden armored cavalry also had such weapons in their hands, would they still be afraid of anyone? Not only Wuxia, many of the golden armored cavalry also thought of the key point. They were all indignant and unwilling to admit defeat, thinking that this was the result of the Han army's tricks. However, he had forgotten that the Black Cavalry Dragon Guards had only revealed their powerful side. Both sides had yet to truly clash, and many of the cavalry skills had yet to be revealed. If they were to truly clash with the Black Cavalry Dragon Guard's armor, the golden armored cavalry would not be able to injure them at all. How could they possibly win? The sound of gunfire stopped the golden armored cavalry's charge. At this moment, Yang Chendong's eyes revealed a trace of impatience. The golden armored cavalry was not as strong as he had imagined. At least, they did not show much strength in the battle just now. Perhaps this was because the Golden Horde had not had an opponent for too long. Since the golden armored cavalry wasn't that powerful, there was no need to spend so much effort to recruit them. Yang Chendong's initial expectations for these golden armored cavalry that were only slightly stronger than ordinary cavalry had now turned into disappointment. They could not even detect the changes in their weapons. Just from this point alone, their observational skills and vigilance were too weak. They could not be called elites. Without a strong desire to conquer, Yang Chendong naturally would not be courteous to the golden armored cavalry. He nodded to the 2nd Division commander Xiao Feng beside him. Then, the soldiers of the Cold Front began to move on a large scale, quickly forming a square formation and surrounding the golden armored cavalry. At this moment, a simple megaphone was placed in front of Yang Chendong. Chapter 1463. The soldiers of the Cold Front started to move, which attracted the curiosity of the surrounding generals. For example, Gray, Qi Wen, Barry, Yuchuo, Erqi, and the other Mongol generals who had surrendered to the Mongol Empire looked at this scene in confusion. Just a moment ago, the Heavenly Khan had clearly shown the intention of recruiting them. Now he was about to attack. What exactly was going on? Yang Chendong noticed the reactions of the Mongol generals and sneered in his heart. What was he going to do? Of course, he was going to kill the chicken to warn the monkey. No, he was going to kill the monkey to warn the chicken. However, there were times when showing kindness was unable to convince the masses. Only by showing kindness and mercy could he achieve good results. Previously, he had been recruiting talents. In fact, it was inevitable that there would be a mix of good and bad people. There would also be some who had other thoughts in their hearts. However, this did not matter. The current Yang Chendong did not pay attention to these small details. His eyes were more focused on the overall situation. As long as these Mongol cavalry who had surrendered were willing to be used by him, so what if they had their own plans? As long as he was strong enough, these people would not dare to play any tricks. How should he display his strength? Killing the golden armored cavalry was the best warning. Standing in front of the loudspeaker, Yang Chendong's voice rang out in front of everyone. You have been surrounded. I will give you 10 breaths of time to choose whether to surrender or resist. If no one surrenders after 10 breaths, I will kill a row of people. His voice was firm and powerful. After Yang Chendong finished speaking, everyone's gazes landed on the surrounded golden-armored cavalry. Gray, Qi Wen, and the other generals were shocked by Yang Chendong's decision. At the very least, if it was them, they would definitely not have the courage to kill elites like the golden-armored cavalry. After all, elite cavalry represented a kind of status. In front of the Mongol cavalry, who did not pay attention to economy and relied mostly on robbing, whoever had a strong army would have the strongest strength. It was equivalent to having everything. On the other hand, Yang Chendong should know this principle. He had even recruited the ordinary Mongol cavalry. How could he leave the golden-armored cavalry alone? Thinking about it, he was probably just shouting to scare the other party. 10 breaths of time quickly passed. Everyone believed that the Han army would not easily start a massacre. Even Wu Shugu thought so. When the time was up, Yang Chendong lightly tapped his forehead. Division Commander Xiao Feng, who had been paying attention to him, immediately ordered, "Open fire." As his voice fell, the sound of gunfire continued to ring out. After a series of popping sounds, the outermost cavalry of the golden-armored cavalry 400 steps away fell down. The blood was dazzling to the eye and the smell was pungent to the nose. All of this indicated to everyone that all of this was really happening. The gunshots frightened all the Mongolian generals. They didn't expect the Khan to be so decisive. He didn't even hesitate to open fire. Yang Chendong snorted coldly in his heart when he saw everyone's expressions. He then said, "The 10 breaths countdown starts now. Do you still want to kill?" When the Mongolian generals heard this, their expressions changed. This time, no one thought that Yang Chendong was joking. Their expressions became serious. The Han army's actions had exceeded their expectations and changed their understanding. The Mongolian generals who thought that everything was in their hands began to panic. No matter what, when things didn't go according to your plan, anyone would feel a sense of trepidation. Furthermore, this involved their future and even their lives. They thought that the Han army needed them. This way, they would have something to rely on and could even bargain. However, the shooting of the golden-armored cavalry clearly told them that the Han army did not care much about the Mongolian cavalry and did not need them. Otherwise, why would they kill them so easily? This was the golden-armored cavalry, the most elite cavalry of the Golden Horde. They were the strongest fighting force in the Golden Horde. Normally, Mahama would feel heartache when he lost dozens of men. However, the volley of shots just now was enough to take the lives of over 300 golden-armored cavalry. This result shocked the Mongolian generals who had surrendered. The Mongolian generals who had been waiting for the best price all retracted their arrogance and began to think about what to do next to protect their lives and wealth. The 10 breaths are up. After Yang Chendong nodded lightly again, Commander Xiao Feng's voice rang out once again. It was as if the gates of hell had been opened. This time around, the gunshots were even more intense, and the number of golden-armored cavalrymen killed had reached about 500. More and more people died. When the Mongol generals saw the death of the Han army, they were all shocked. This was exactly what Yang Chendong wanted. He did not choose to kill all 20,000 of them at once. It was not that he did not have the ability, but he needed to intimidate them. Now, it seemed that killing them in batches was better than killing them all at once. The effect of killing the monkey to warn the chicken could be achieved. In the golden-armored cavalry formation, the expressions of the soldiers had all changed. Just think of how arrogant they usually were. Often, when there was a mission to complete, they didn't need to do anything. They just needed to stand there and their opponents would be afraid. Then, they would be free to do whatever they wanted. But this time, when facing the Han army, not only were they not afraid, but they also did not put him in their eyes. They had become prey for others to take away at will. "General, what should we do?" A few Kiliarchs came to Wu Shugu's side and asked anxiously. "Wait a little longer. I don't believe that they will really ignore us. Can't they just kill us all?" Wu Shugu said stubbornly. His eyesight was not bad, and he had already seen Gray, Qi Wen, and the others. Looking at where they were standing, he knew that they had surrendered to the Han army. Since they could be accepted by the Han army, why couldn't they accept the 20,000 golden armored cavalry? He did not surrender not because he was still loyal to the Khan, but because he wanted to wait for the best price. The golden armored cavalry had been established for over 100 years. They had served over a dozen Khans, and they had changed batches after batches. Until now, their loyalty was not as good as before. Furthermore, Mahama had just died, and they had not interacted much with the new Khan, Bola. They had not received any favors from him, so there was no need to talk about loyalty. At this moment, they did not believe that they would all die for Bola. It was also because of this that Wu Shugu did not give the order to break out. It was not that he did not want freedom, but he was afraid of the might of the Han army's firearms. He did not break out just now, and he did not have the courage to do so now. What they needed to do now was to fight for better treatment. Originally, after fighting with the Han army, they should have been able to display their strength and attract the other party's attention. This would naturally be beneficial for the negotiations. However, who would have thought that they would lose so easily? Now they had lost, and the other party did not seem to see their use. They had started a massacre, and with just 2 gunshots, over 800 golden armored cavalry had died on their horses. If this continued, how long could these 20,000 people last? If they could not hold on, would they have to take the initiative to surrender? Surrendering was already a shameful thing. If they took the initiative to surrender, they would gain nothing. Even if they barely managed to survive, they would be looked down upon. They were the strongest elite cavalry of the Golden Horde. They were the golden armored cavalry. While Wu Shugu was still thinking about something, another 10 breaths of time was up. Another round of gunshots rang out, and around 400 corpses were left behind. Back, let me in. Finally, a golden armored cavalry could not take it anymore. The feeling of stepping on the line between life and death made their expressions change. They wanted to retreat to the center of the cavalry formation. At least they would not feel the sensation of death immediately. What are you squeezing for? Don't push. Fuck, if you squeeze again, I'll beat you up. How could the golden armored cavalry in the center of the formation give up their space? That was equivalent to putting themselves in danger. Of course, he would not agree to it since he did not want his friends to die. Now, before the cold spear warriors could fire, the golden armored cavalry's formation was in chaos. In order to get closer to the center so that they wouldn't become the next target of the muskets, some people couldn't help but attack their comrades. Since they were all going to die, they might as well fight it out. Perhaps they could even squeeze into a better position and live a little longer. The formation was in chaos. Wu Shugu, who was in the center of the formation, was quickly affected. He saw the golden armored cavalry in front of him retreat. The golden armored cavalry in the back tried to stop them. There were signs of internal strife, and he could no longer sit still. Although surrendering was embarrassing, if his strength was greatly reduced, the Han army would find him a punching bag. If he could not live after surrendering, wouldn't he gain nothing? Wu Shugu made up his mind. He could not let things go on like this. Everyone quiet down. Don't make any more noise. Wu Shugu finally stepped forward and roared. Only then did some of the golden armored cavalrymen who had drawn their swords calm down. Bang, 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 another round of gunshots rang out. Several hundred golden armored cavalry who were squeezed in the periphery were shot and fell to the ground, leaving behind a group of lonely warhorses. Don't shoot, we surrender, we surrender. Wu Shugu was both angry and anxious when he saw that the Han army was still shooting at him even though he had already stood up for them. He was angry because the Han army did not take them seriously. He was anxious because he had to make a decision quickly. Otherwise, the number of golden armored cavalry would decrease, and he would only be a general in name. Chapter 1464. Worried that another wave of Han soldiers would come, Wu Shugu could not care about anything else. He urged his horse to charge forward until he reached the front of the cavalry. When he was only 100 steps away from the Han soldiers, he stopped his horse and said, "Stop shooting. I am the general of the golden armored cavalry, Wuxia. I am here to surrender." Yang Chendong didn't recognize Wuxia, so he turned to Gray with a questioning look on his face. "That's right, Heavenly Khan. This person is the general of the golden armored cavalry. It seems that his surrender must be true. Heaven Khan, please show mercy." Gray used the introduction as an opportunity to plead for mercy. With Gray taking the lead, Qi Wen, Baru, Wu Tu'a, and the other generals also began to plead. The golden armored cavalry was the elite of the Mongol cavalry. It would be a pity if they died like this. Yang Chendong did not immediately reply. Instead, he appeared to be in deep thought. After 5 or 6 breaths, he said, "Originally, I wanted to kill them. However, since you all are pleading for mercy, I will spare their lives. However, while they can avoid death, they cannot escape punishment. From now on, there will be no more golden armored cavalry. The remaining 20,000 will be divided among the generals." It was fine to leave the golden armored cavalry, but they had to be scattered. Otherwise, no matter where they were placed, they would cause unease. The 5-star army was not made up of the Black Cavalry and the elites of the 1st Cavalry Army. If it was an ordinary army, they would be under a lot of pressure when facing the golden armored cavalry. For safety reasons, this army could not be left alive. When Yang Chendong finished speaking, the eyes of the other Mongol generals lit up. They did not expect that pleading for mercy for their comrades would actually bring them benefits. This was the golden armored cavalry. Even if they were given a few thousand each, it would still be a very powerful force. Thinking that this was the benefit that Yang Chendong had given them, the generals got off their horses and knelt on the ground. While expressing their gratitude, they were also expressing their loyalty. "Everyone rise. Since these people have chosen to surrender, I will leave the rest to you. Let's enter the city first." Looking at the majestic new Salai city behind him, Yang Chendong said calmly, "The new capital of the Golden Horde would also be trampled under his feet." Considering the death of the old Khan Mahama and the capture of the new Khan Bora, it also indicated the end of the Golden Horde that had lasted for more than 200 years. As the Terminator, Yang Chendong felt proud. Throughout history, it had always been the Mongols finding trouble with the Hans. If anyone could advance 1,000 li and drive them away, it would already be a great achievement. Yet today he'd actually killed his way to their lair and uprooted them. What sort of great achievement was this? After the 2 great Khans were killed and captured by the Han army, the Golden Horde soldiers hiding within the city were already scared out of their wits. Under the threat of Gray, Qi Wen and the rest, when they saw the hundreds of cannons aimed at the city gates, the Mongol soldiers within the city finally chose to surrender. Compared to the time when Salai city was conquered, the nobles all ran away. This time, it was like catching turtles in a jar, and they were all captured. The Golden Horde had lasted for more than 200 years, and the nobles had also lasted for more than 200 years. The amount of wealth they had accumulated was so great that Yang Chendong was scared out of his wits when She returned the favor. Even though he had made some preparations and had obtained more than 200 million taels of silver in Salai city, when he heard that he had obtained more than 300 million taels of silver from these nobles, he was still very surprised and happy. Sixth young master, these things are not all silver. Instead, most of them are jewels. They have already been sealed and stored away. Once the silver in Salai city has been transported away, the treasures here will be transported away. When She said this, his expression was also very excited. After all, for someone who was used to being poor, suddenly having a mountain of gold in front of them, one could imagine how excited he would be. Yang Chendong's thoughts also returned to his hometown because of this sentence. How much longer will it take for Salai city to settle the issue of seizing and transporting the goods? About 1.5 more months. Sixth young master, as you know, we have seized so much that we have mobilized all the carriages we can, but it will still take a lot of time. When he said this, She was also very emotional. He had never thought that one day he would have a headache because of too much seizing and transporting. 1.5 more months, then let's wait for the goods here to be transported away. Yang Chendong was a little numb, but he was even happier. After all, no one would complain about having too much money, even if he was the Lord of Xianxia. Especially when he thought about how much they had seized this time, once they reached Qichen City, and the news spread throughout the world. Presumably those who had stopped him from sending troops would all shut their mouths. Reality had already proven that the benefits of opening up a new territory far exceeded everyone's expectations. Just based on this, when Yang Chendong wanted to point his troops elsewhere in the future, no one would come out to stop him. Just as he was thinking about how ugly some people's faces would be after the news spread, an indescribable smile flashed across Yang Chendong's face. After a while, when Yang Chendong was almost done rejoicing, he noticed that Sheibi was still standing in front of him. Is there something else? Sixth young master, there is something. Sheibi said with a conflicted expression. Speaking of which, Yang Chendong and Sheibi had known each other for many years, and he admired Sheibi's abilities. Reality had also proven that Sheibi was a person who could remain calm and make his own decisions when faced with big matters. However, he did not know what was so difficult for him. Commander Shay, there are no outsiders here. If you have something to say, just say it. Yang Chendong's expression returned to normal. Originally, Sheibi did not know how to phrase the matter he wanted to report. However, seeing that Yang Chendong did not treat him as an outsider, he decided to speak the truth. He immediately bent his knees and knelt down. Sixth young master, please restrain the Mongolian cavalry who just surrendered. You don't know, but the city is in a mess because of them. The citizens are complaining and many of them are already thinking of moving out. What? There's such a thing? Yang Chendong suddenly stood up from his chair. His expression was extremely ugly at this moment, and there was even a faint killing intent that flowed out. Yes, sixth young master, you only need to send people to check the streets to see if what I said is true or false. Although those surrendered generals have some merits, they should not treat the citizens like this. If this continues, I'm afraid there will be a big problem. Since he had already started, he didn't hesitate to say what he wanted to say next. He said whatever came to his mind. Even if he offended those surrendered generals, he was willing to accept it. When he heard that there would be a big problem, Yang Chendong knew that things must have reached a point where they could not be controlled. Otherwise, Sheibi, who was always calm when faced with problems, would not say such words. How long has it been? He was naturally asking how long the chaos had been in the city. Sheibi's heart shook. He knew that Yang Chendong had found the crux of the matter. He lowered his head and said, replying to the sixth young master, it has been 4 days. 4 days. We've only been in New Sarai City for 4 days. Does that mean they've been here since they entered the city? Yang Chendong's eyes flashed with a murderous aura. It was no wonder that he was so angry. Before entering the city, he had told his generals that they were not to disturb the citizens after entering the city. In the future, the citizens here would be Xia's citizens and they must be treated well. He remembered that the generals agreed very happily at that time. But looking at Sheibi's words, it seemed that no one took his words seriously. Seeing Yang Chendong's killing intent, Sheibi replied with some trepidation, yes, after they entered the city, the surrendered soldiers began to loot. At first, it was targeted at the rich and powerful, but later on, even the commoners became the targets of the loot. Listening to Sheibi's report, Yang Chendong's face was as calm as water. Since it has been 4 days, why did you only report it now? Sheibi did not know how to answer. Fortunately, Yang Chendong then said the answer. You don't think that they are the surrendered generals. Without them, we would not have won this battle so easily, so they are the meritorious officials. It is not good to report the meritorious officials. It will make people misunderstand that you are jealous, right? It is just that this general is not jealous. It is just that they have all performed meritorious deeds. If we attack them now, I fear that there will be people who will think otherwise. If that happens, it will not be good for your reputation, sixth young master. Sheibi explained. My reputation will not be good? What is reputation? Sheibi, it seems that you still have a lot to learn. You don't know that reputation is just a way for some people to express their opinions. However, true reputation is that the commoners can eat well, wear warm clothes, and live in peace and contentment. Only then can you be considered a qualified monarch. If you can't do this, even if everyone praises you, is it really good? Hearing Yang Chendong's sincere and heartfelt words, Shabi nodded repeatedly and said, "Yes, this general understands." What should be said had been said. Now, it was up to Shabi to comprehend it himself. However, the matter of the surrendered soldiers looting had to be resolved. Shabi, immediately send the order. Have the surrendered soldiers come to this prince for a meeting. Was this raising the butcher's knife? Shabi thought in his heart. He nodded repeatedly and said, "Yes, this general will go and pass the order." It had been 4 days since Yang Chendong led the army into New Salai city. In these few days, Yang Chendong stayed in Mahama's golden tent and did not go out. There were simply too many good things here. Some of them could be said to be priceless existences. Even Yang Chendong was not an exception. He did his best to play with each item for a while. Chapter 1465. Because of this, they did not know what was happening outside. Moreover, because these surrendered generals did things methodically, the place where they looted was far away from the golden tent. Therefore, even the black cavalry did not notice. If it was not for Yubi's report, it would probably take a day or two or something big to report. As soon as Yubi left, Yang Chendong immediately asked Beta Persei to call the manager of the city's intelligence department to find out what had happened in the city in the past 4 days. Soon, Beta Persei returned and found out more details from him. His story was even more interesting than Yubi's. According to the data reported by the intelligence department, the number of civilians killed and injured because of the looting reached more than 200. As for the injured, there were countless more. Good, a dog can't change its habit of eating shit. Yang Chendong said angrily. At this moment, he really wanted to kill all the surrendered soldiers who looted. However, he also knew that this was not the action of a wise man. Doing this would only treat the symptoms and not the root cause. What he wanted was for all the surrendered generals to reflect on this matter from the bottom of their hearts, and not rely on government orders to restrain them. After more than 2 hours, the surrendered generals in the city rushed to the golden tent. Some of them were more than 10 miles away, and rushed over as soon as they heard the news. When they arrived, they had a confused look on their faces. Obviously, they did not understand why the heavenly Khan suddenly summoned them. As the leader of the generals, Gray's mind was also a mess. However, he was not as flustered as everyone else. On the contrary, he sat quietly in the hall and drank tea like the Han people. He was very clear that if he wanted to integrate into the Han army, he had to do his best to maintain the same habits as them. This was the best way to get closer to them. In contrast, the other generals did not have the time to be so calm. They sat on their chairs and made a lot of noise, just like when the Golden Horde held a meeting. There was no change at all. Among them, Bodo's voice was the loudest. This former scout general of the Golden Horde eventually surrendered to the Han army and retained his position as a general. Perhaps it was because he was a scout general, but he understood the situation in New Sarai better than anyone else, so he knew better than anyone else who had the most silver. So in this battle, he was the one who profited the most. Of course, Bodo wasn't an insensible person. After looting a lot of gold and silver, he took out a portion of it to show his filial piety to other people and comrades. For example, General Gray, Baruch, and Wutu all received a share. He even gave money to Shibi, Ahuli, Wu Shugu, and the others. Unfortunately, these people did not accept it and returned it. However, Bodo didn't mind. It was only because they were all Mongolians that he decided to share the good fortune with them, especially Shirbei. He heard that Shirbei was a commander in the Han army. Although he did not know what this meant, it should be a high position. However, no matter how high his position was, he couldn't control himself. His immediate superior was Gray. As long as he served Gray well, there wouldn't be any problems. At this moment, Bodo was talking about robbing a rich family. He was talking about how he rushed into the house of a noble from the Golden Horde and dug out his hidden treasures. When the noble knelt down and begged for mercy, Baruch and Wutu, who were listening at the side, laughed along. Obviously, such a noble was an unreachable existence in the past. Even if they met him, he wouldn't even look at them in the eye. But now, he actually had to kneel down and beg for mercy. That feeling couldn't be any better. At this moment, Yang Chendong walked into the hall under the protection of Beta Persei and a group of black cavalry soldiers. Instantly, the hall became extremely quiet. Even Bodo kept his mouth shut. In fact, the scene of Yang Chendong ordering the golden armored cavalry to be cleaned up brought too much shock to everyone. This person was someone who wouldn't hesitate to kill if he couldn't be used. He didn't have the humble, courteous, and forgiving personality of the Han people. Evil people would naturally be dealt with by evil people. It was precisely because of Yang Chendong's performance that the Mongolian generals were afraid of him from the bottom of their hearts. Yang Chendong strode into the hall and arrived at the head of the table. Then, he suddenly turned around and fiercely swept his gaze across everyone present. Following Yang Chendong's gaze, everyone who met his gaze quickly lowered their heads. Obviously, everyone was afraid of his gaze. Seeing that everyone had lowered their heads, even Bodo, who was very active just now, Yang Chendong coldly snorted and said, "Men, take Bodo out and chop him up." The black cavalry soldiers who had been waiting for a long time stepped forward with their swords and went straight for Bodo, who was still sitting on the chair and hadn't recovered from his shock. "What are you doing?" Just as the black cavalry was 2 steps away, Bodo finally reacted. He pulled out his sword and placed it in front of his chest, then shouted, "Why do you want to kill me? You still dare to resist?" Seeing Bodo's seemingly instinctive reaction, Beta Persei was amused. While laughing, he moved one of his wrists. However, before he could step forward, Ba Daojiang had already rushed out and said, "How can we use second brother's great self to deal with a clown like this? I'll take care of him." Seeing Ba Daojiang rush out first, Beta Persei's face was filled with anger. However, he quickly calmed down. They were all brothers, so it didn't matter who did the teaching. Moreover, just as Ba Daojiang said, a small scout general wasn't worthy of him taking the initiative. Ba Daojiang rushed out. This former member of the Jianghu wasn't weak to begin with, and after years of experience, he was even more agile and powerful. He leaped forward and arrived in front of Bodo in 2 quick steps. Then, without waiting for Bodo to swing his sword, he kicked out, and a curved sword fell from the air. After kicking the curved sword out of Bodo's hand, Ba Daojiang followed up with a roundhouse kick to Bodo's chest. Under the powerful force, a cracking sound was heard, and Bodo's chest caved in. Your legs are getting stronger again." Yang Chendong looked at the scene with admiration and nodded his head in satisfaction. Bodo, whose chest caved in from the kick, fell to the ground with a plop. At that moment, blood was flowing out from the corner of his mouth, and he looked like he was about to die. Even so, his gaze was still fixed on Gray. Although his mouth was open, no sound came out. However, if one looked closely, they could see that he was saying the words, "Save me. Tie him up and take him out for beheading. Don't dirty this place." Ba Daojiang had already stabilized himself as he spoke in a casual tone. Then he swept his cold gaze towards the other Mongolian generals in the hall. Revealing a harmless smile, he walked back to Beta Persei's side. "Not bad." Seeing Ba Daojiang's return, Beta Persei gave him a thumbs up with a look of praise. Compared to the interaction between the two of them, the other Mongolian generals were all dumbfounded. They didn't understand why Ba Daojiang had come forward to kill someone. This was something they had never experienced before. Even when Mahama was the Khan, he hadn't been so tyrannical. It was said that accompanying a ruler was like accompanying a tiger. At this moment, everyone finally understood. And it was precisely for some unknown reason that everyone couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. Furthermore, everyone was deep in thought. Had they done something that they shouldn't have done recently? Would the next person to be pulled out to be beheaded would be themselves? The hall was even quieter than before. This sudden scene caused the Mongol generals to fall into deep thought. At this moment, Yang Chendong spoke again. Gray, Baruch, do you know your crimes? The three people who were called out were sweating even more now. They hurriedly left their chairs and knelt on the ground with a plop. Their heads were so close to the ground that they had zero contact with it. It was no wonder that the three of them were so nervous. After all, Bodo had just been killed. They were really worried that they would have the same ending. As for what they had done wrong, they really didn't know. However, at this moment, the three of them were smart enough not to say anything. Instead, they knelt on the ground and kowtowed continuously while saying, "We are guilty, guilty. Yes, you are indeed guilty. This Khan has repeatedly ordered that you are not allowed to disturb the people in the city. But what did you do? You clearly knew about Bodo's evil deeds, but not only did you not stop him, you even dared to accept his benefits. I think you are all accomplices." Yang Chendong's strict voice rang out. Hearing that it was actually this matter, the Mongolian generals present had an enlightened look on their faces. At this moment, they finally understood why Bodo had been beheaded. For a moment, many of them rejoiced that they hadn't been possessed to do such a thing. They couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. However, the three people kneeling on the ground all had nervous expressions on their faces. Although they hadn't sent their troops to rob Bodo, they had indeed received a gift from the robber, Bodo. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that they were accomplices. When they thought about Bodo's fate, they were afraid that Yang Chendong would kill them as well. Gray abruptly raised his head and said with a nervous expression, "Heavenly Khan, we were wrong, we were wrong. Please give us another chance on account of our loyalty to you and our contributions to the army." When Gray mentioned contributions, Yang Chendong couldn't help but frown. Just based on this sentence, he had already sentenced Gray to death in his heart. However, just as Gray had said, he had indeed contributed to the army. If Gray was really killed on the spot, it was inevitable that the other Mongolian generals would have other thoughts. This was especially so when the people present included a general who had defected to the 5-star army under his influence. Thus, Gray's punishment had to be extremely careful. Chapter 1466. Yang Chendong took a deep breath and suppressed the anger in his heart. When he looked at Gray, his expression became much calmer. "That's right. The three of you have performed meritorious deeds. Since that's the case, this Khan will give you a chance. Next, we will move against the Ross Empire. The three of you will lead the death squad as the vanguard. If you perform meritorious deeds, you will naturally be reinstated. As for Gray's current position, Ahuli will temporarily take over. What do you think?" Yang Chendong's tone changed. In Gray's ears, it was like spring. Knowing that he wouldn't have to die, how could he disagree? He immediately knelt and cupped his fists. "I am willing to be the generals of the death squad. I am willing to serve the Khan." Yang Chendong revealed a satisfied expression at Gray. Then he looked at everyone and said in a clear voice, "Everyone, you are no longer generals of the Golden Horde. Instead, you are generals of the 5-star army. Since that's the case, you will have to abide by the military rules here. This Khan will say this once more. As soldiers of the 5-star army, you are not allowed to bully the citizens or disrupt the military rules. If there is a next time, no matter who it is, no matter what contributions they have made, they will be severely punished. Ahuli will keep a close eye on this matter. If anyone disobeys, you can kill them first and report later." Ahuli was the former Khan of Zhongxing. Under his rule, the citizens of the city lived a good life. He could be said to be a different kind of person in the Mongolian army. He was an ambitious general who wholeheartedly wanted to change the lives of the citizens. He was the most suitable candidate to replace Gray as the leader of the Mongolian army and to deal with the security issues in the city. Although he was only a temporary representative, what if Gray never came back? Ahuli didn't know what Yang Chendong was thinking, but he could feel that the other party valued him. He immediately knelt on the ground and said sincerely, "Thank you, Great Khan, for thinking so highly of me. Ahuli will do my best to not let you down." From the beginning to the end of the meeting, only 15 minutes had passed. After killing Bodo, reprimanding Gray, and promoting a Huli, Yang Chendong left. It was precisely because of this that the shorter the time they came into contact with Yang Chendong, the more mysterious he was, causing others to not dare look down upon Yang Chendong in the slightest. However, in this short 15 minutes, the pressure on the Mongol army was immense. After seeing how Yang Chendong dealt with Bodo, everyone knew that the Heavenly Khan was an iron-blooded person. He wouldn't let sand get in his eyes. Such a person wasn't easy to fool, and no one dared to fool him. As for giving a chance to Gray, Barlu, and Wu Tua, this proved that the Heavenly Khan was someone who cherished old friendships. Not only did he not incur the disgust of everyone by dealing with the three of them, he even stripped them of their military authority. On the contrary, everyone felt that following him was the right thing to do. At the very least, they wouldn't erase their previous military exploits because of a small matter. They should make more military exploits so that they would be safe. Just borrowing a person's head had produced such an effect. After hearing this, Shirbei couldn't help but sigh. The sixth young master was indeed the sixth young master. His methods of solving problems weren't something he could compare to. After this incident, the public security in New Sarai immediately improved. Ordinary people were no longer bullied, and under Ahuli's leadership, the stolen property was returned untouched. Yang Chendong's reputation also resounded throughout this land. Using this opportunity, Yang Chendong called Ahuli over and gave him the order to deal with the Churkas and Alans. Remember, any forces that oppose us must be completely eradicated. There can only be one voice here, and that is to die if you don't surrender. This time, I'll give you 200,000 Mongol soldiers and enough provisions. At the same time, I'll equip you with a firearm regiment and 50 field cannons. Do you have any other questions? After calling Ahuli over, Yang Chendong instructed him. Being able to lead an army alone was somewhat beyond Ahuli's expectations. He was just a surrender general. Although he had been a Khan before, he only led 30,000 soldiers. But now, he could lead 200,000 soldiers with the support of guns and cannons. This was something he had never dreamed of. This general will do his best to complete this mission and live up to the Heavenly Khan's expectations. At this moment, Ahuli couldn't wait to dig out his heart and give it to Yang Chendong to repay his kindness. Feeling Ahuli's excitement, Yang Chendong got up and walked in front of him. He patted him on the shoulder and said, "Very good, this Khan is looking forward to your performance. By the way, I'll also give you the 20,000 golden armored cavalry. Make good use of them. This is a force that can't be ignored." Yang Chendong didn't think highly of the golden armored cavalry, especially after knowing that after many years of development, their strength was no longer as strong as before, so he didn't think highly of them. But if he left them to Ahuli to deal with the other Mongol tribes, they would still be a force to be reckoned with. Just the golden armored cavalry alone wouldn't be able to harm them with ordinary swords. Yes, yes. Ahuli kept nodding his head and making a promise. After arranging Ahuli's affairs, Yang Chendong began to prepare for the invasion of Russia. As the leader of Xianxia and the founder of the Five-Star Army, it was destined that he couldn't stay in one place for too long. It had been 3 years since he entered the Far East. According to his plan, he had to deal with the situation here this year. Fortunately, the Golden Horde had been destroyed, so he had already completed half of his mission. The next step was to deal with the White Russians. Facing an enemy that relied more on outdated firearms, Yang Chendong was full of confidence. 7 days later, Ahuli, who had made sufficient preparations, led 200,000 Mongol surrendered soldiers out of New Salai and went straight to the Sherkas camp. Half a month later, a large number of horses flooded into the city. They were all responsible for transporting gold and silver. Following the arrival of this army, Yang Chendong also led the 200,000 Mongol soldiers, the new Second Army, and the remaining 3 firearm regiments and an artillery regiment of the 2nd Cold Front Division out of the city. They headed straight for the Rossi Duchy's territory. Rossi Duchy's capital, Moscow. It was currently shrouded in dark clouds. In the main hall of the duchy, the blind Grand Justice looked at the scout general with a gloomy expression as he reported the battle report. Since last winter, the Rossi Duchy had been preparing to send troops north. They wanted to chase out the Han army that occupied the northernmost city, Oxino. For this, they had made a lot of preparations, such as military supplies, provisions, firearms, cannons, and even war horses. They were just waiting for the coming year to show their might. But before they could send troops north, they had received news that the Han army was going to attack the Golden Horde. They had also heard that the Han army was coming aggressively, with more than 100,000 soldiers. When they first heard the news, the important officials and nobles of the Rossi Duchy did not take it seriously. Everyone only cared about what benefits they could gain from this battle. After a heated discussion in the court, the final conclusion was to stop sending troops north and focus on the east. They would wait for the Han army to be defeated by the Golden Horde, then they would take the opportunity to strike and reap the benefits. When the time was right, they would send troops north. It would be easy for them to take back Oxino. However, the outcome of the battle was far beyond everyone's expectations. The Han army quickly breached Sarai, the capital of the Golden Horde, forcing Mahama Khan to retreat to the city of Xianxia to avoid the brunt of the attack. Not only that, the tough Mahama even sent an envoy to ask for help from the Rossi Duchy. The two sides had been fighting for many years, and it was more appropriate to call them old enemies. During this time, they had won and lost some, but no one had expected that the two would one day join forces, and that the Golden Horde would take the initiative to ask for help. As for the envoy sent by the Golden Horde, the blind Duke arranged for someone to send him to the post house, and then he came to discuss this matter with the other officials. Regarding this matter, the officials had two opinions. One was to send troops, and the other was to not send troops. The reason for not sending troops was to use the Han army to deal a heavy blow to the Golden Horde, which would be more beneficial to the Rossi Duchy's independence and unification. The reason for sending troops was to prevent the Han army from becoming too powerful. After all, Mahama was a very proud person. Even he had to lower himself to ask for help. This showed that the Han army's fighting strength was very strong. If he didn't help, once the Han army really subdued the Golden Horde, he wouldn't have anything to worry about when fighting with the Han army in the future. Yes, even at this time, the Rossi people still believed that although the Han army was strong, they could only defeat the Golden Horde and not defeat it. The Golden Horde could summon hundreds of thousands of cavalry at any time with a decree, and the Rossi people had already experienced the strength of the Golden Horde. No one could defeat the Golden Horde, at least not in the short term. This had become the consensus of the Rossi people. The meeting lasted for a long time, and in the end, the people who wanted to send reinforcements had the upper hand. The blind Duke finally decided to send reinforcements, but it would take time to send the troops from the north to the east. They did not have the convenience of carrying food with them like the 5-star army, so they needed a lot of time to prepare. Finally, 10 days later, the 100,000 reinforcements prepared by the Rossi started their journey. This was thanks to the previous preparations, otherwise, they would not have been able to set off so quickly. But at this time, new news came. The Han army was already outside New Sarai, engaged in a major battle with the Golden Horde, and finally won. They killed Mahama Khan with cannon fire and captured Bora Khan. Hundreds of thousands of Mongolian cavalry were defeated, and the Golden Horde was about to become history. The Rossi people's enemy also changed from the Golden Horde to the Han army. When the news came, the entire Rossi people were shocked. Many people did not believe the truth of this matter. Although more than one group of scouts reported the same news, there were still many people who did not believe it. How could the powerful Golden Horde be destroyed so easily? Even if it was destroyed, it should be done by the powerful Rossi people. Chapter 1467. Regardless of whether they believed it or not, the truth was the truth. In the next few days to half a month, the Rossi Duchy was still trying to find out how the Golden Horde was destroyed by the Han army in such a short period of time. News came again that the Han army had turned around and was heading towards the Rossi Duchy. How did the Han army manage to reorganize so quickly and digest the hundreds of thousands of Mongol cavalrymen? Very quickly, no one bothered about this question, because the next target of the Han army was themselves. Even the powerful Golden Horde had been wiped out in less than a month. The question was, how long could the Rossi kingdom last as their opponent? All of the officials and nobles started to panic. For the first time, they realized that they had lost their confidence and did not know how to face the Han army. At this time, another piece of bad news came. The Han army in the northern cities had moved. They had suddenly set off from Oxino City and moved from the north to the south. They had conquered Ust Lima City and were heading towards Arkhangelsk City. This was obviously to coordinate with the Han army to deal with the Ross country. After the news came, the Ross country, which was already frightened, fell into chaos once again. Some of the capitulators were also born. This seemed to be a law of historical development. No matter how strong a country was, there would always be some people who were afraid of death. When danger came, their first thought was not how to face it, but how to protect their own interests. The so-called negotiation party, which was also the capitulators, jumped out at this time. In the court, the capitulators, led by Nevsky, quickly made their voices known. They wanted to immediately send people to negotiate with the Han army before the other side had taken down more cities. They wanted to negotiate with the Han army before they had the strength to negotiate. For this, they were willing to pay a price and even give up some cities. In the eyes of the capitulators, the Han army did not have the strength to destroy them. Although they had defeated the Golden Horde, they had definitely lost a lot of their strength. Furthermore, they had captured hundreds of thousands of Mongol cavalrymen. These people were all arrogant and unruly, so how could they be so easily subdued? It would probably take some time to deal with them. This was an opportunity for the Russian Empire. While the Russian Empire was not completely stable internally, they would take the initiative to show weakness and dispel the Russian Empire's killing intent. This would create enough time and opportunity for the Russian Empire's development. Nevsky even suggested that they should submit to the Han Chinese if necessary. Anyway, it's not like they haven't done such things before. Didn't they submit to the Golden Horde before? Once this idea was made, it quickly gained the upper hand. Many important officials, generals, and nobles of the court expressed their support. He also urged the blind duke to quickly settle the matter and have a good talk with the Han army. They did not want to wait for the enemy soldiers to arrive at the city gates. At that time, everything would be too late. The blind duke looked down on these spineless people. However, he knew that the other party was right. Now that the morale of the Han army was high, it would not be wise to make an enemy out of them. If they could drag things out and wait for the other party to not have so much killing intent, wait for the hundreds of thousands of Mongolian cavalry captives to start causing trouble, and wait for the internal situation to become unstable. Only then could they counterattack, and their chances of winning would be much higher. The blind duke, who had his own plans, finally agreed to the idea of surrendering. He sent out a negotiation team led by Nevsky to welcome the Han army that was heading towards Moscow. He hoped to settle the matter as soon as possible. After receiving the order, Nevsky prepared for a night and set off early the next morning. It could be seen that he had done a lot of work in private. After he left, under the leadership of young Master Ivan outside of Moscow, the excavation of the tunnel began. The tunnels were the best way to restrain the charge of the cavalrymen. Then they would use their muskets to counterattack. This was the tactic they used to deal with the Golden Horde cavalrymen. They sent people to negotiate while preparing for war. This action showed the stubborn and cunning side of the Russian Empire, especially Ivan, who said to the outside world that the strong would not place their hopes on the enemy, and that their own strength was the most important thing. Not to mention the various preparations outside of Moscow, just the fact that Nevsky and his men rushed over, they finally met the Han vanguard army in Kazan City. When they reported their identities and took out the relevant documents, the vanguard general, the current commander of the Russian division, Nikolaev, welcomed them. They were all Caucasians and they were connected by blood. This made Nevikov very happy. As soon as he saw Nicholas, he tried to get close to him, as if they were talking about their common ancestor. He wanted Nicholas to speak for him in the future. Naturally, Nikolaev gave him the cold shoulder. It was true that he was from the Russian Empire, but he was not from the Russian Empire. He had never enjoyed any benefits from the establishment of the Russian Empire. Where did the Rossi people go when he had no food to eat? When he was bullied by the Mongol cavalry, where did the Russians go? When people in his tribe froze to death because of the cold, where did the Russians go? If it weren't for the appearance of Yang Chendong, their tribe would still be hiding like rats in the dark. They would still not have enough to eat and sleep, and even their safety would not be guaranteed. During the most dangerous time, it was Yang Chendong who saved his tribe. Now that he had entrusted him with such an important task, how could Nikolaev not know which side he should stand on? Nikolai didn't even spare a glance at Nevikov's flattery and the gifts that Nevikov gave him. He would not forget that there was a day in the military regulations of the five-star army that no one was allowed to privately give gifts. Regardless of whether they were given by subordinates or enemies, they would be severely punished. If it was light, they would lose their position. If it was heavy, they would lose their lives. The might of the five-star army's military regulations could be seen from how General Bodo was beheaded on the spot. Furthermore, Yang Chendong was using the carrot and the stick. After killing Bodo and punishing Gray, Baruch, and Yuto, he took out a sum of silver to reward the other generals who did not commit any crimes. By doing so, not only did he reward the people who did not commit any crimes, he also divided the Mongol surrendered soldiers, who were not as united as a single piece of metal. It could be imagined that the Mongol generals who received the rewards would definitely side with Yang Chendong. If that happened, they would be the first to oppose anyone who dared to play any tricks. This was his master, Yang Chendong. He possessed such unyielding methods, as well as those omnipotent firearms and cannons. It could be said that his methods were unfathomable. More importantly, he was indebted to him for recognizing his worth. If not for his timely appearance, how would his clansmen be able to live peacefully in the large houses in the city? How would they be able to eat their fill and wear warm clothes without worrying about food and clothing? How would their children be able to go to school and learn how to read? Just based on this, Nikolaev had long since become Yang Chendong's most loyal subordinate. He would definitely not allow himself or anyone else to harm Yang Chendong's interests. With such a firm will, Nikolaev's actions were destined to not receive any response. Seeing how difficult it was to talk to Nikolaev, he could only helplessly request for him to report to the Han army's commander. He wanted to meet Yang Chendong personally and report to him. Naturally, Nikolaev did not dare to neglect such a matter. Although he did not have a good impression of these self-proclaimed White Russians, he did not understand Yang Chendong's intentions. Naturally, he did not dare to make a decision on his own. Very quickly, Nikolaev reported the matter of Nikolaev representing the Ros Duchy to Yang Chendong, who was rushing over. He also quickly received the order to stay put. When the news was passed to Nikolaev, he was naturally very happy. He knew that the Han army's commander had the intention to negotiate. At that moment, he began to carefully consider what to say when he met the person in question. Was Yang Chendong preparing to negotiate with the Ros Duchy? The answer was that it was impossible. Others might not know, but Yang Chendong was very clear. Whether it was the current blind duke or his successor, Ivan, they were all very famous figures in White Russia's history. They were all elites among elites. He would never underestimate such an enemy, nor would he give such a person a chance to catch his breath and make a comeback. The reason why he wanted to negotiate was because he wanted to use the White Russians to surrender. He wanted to see how he could obtain the greatest benefits with the smallest price. 3 days later, the Central Army resisted Kazan City. Nikolaev and Nikolaev came out of the city together to welcome Yang Chendong's arrival. From afar, when he saw that Yang Chendong was only a man in his 30s, Nikolaev was shocked. After coming here, Nikolaev had done a lot of work. He spent a lot of money to get to know some of the officers in the Foreign Division. From them, he learned some things about Yang Chendong. He learned that this Han Bugnam of Gojoseon had started more than a decade ago. Then he expanded his territory and even conquered a huge territory that was not inferior to the Golden Horde's ancestors. It was precisely because of this that Nyaku thought that this Wunan prince of the Great Ming dynasty was in his 50s, or at least close to his 50s. Otherwise, if he started more than a decade ago, How could he gain the trust of others and have such a strong appeal? However, the moment he saw Yang Chendong with his own eyes, he knew that he was wrong. This Prince Wu Nan of the Great Ming Dynasty was too young. If this was the case, didn't this person already have his own army when he was in his teens? Even the most outstanding youth in the Ross Duchy, Ivan, could not compare to this kind of talent. Chapter 1468. Yang Chendong's age shocked Nekov and gave him a feeling that the following negotiations would not go smoothly. The younger they were, the more impulsive they were and the more arrogant they would be. Naturally, they would not be easy to deal with. Yang Chendong entered the city. In the house arranged by Nikolai, he met with Nekov. Nekov was more than 50 years old, and he was also a noble in the White Russia. He was also the representative of the capitulation faction in the country. Both sides met in the main hall. Yang Chendong was accompanied by Beta Persei and Shibi. It could be seen that Yang Chendong intended to promote this person and teach him more. This was also a sign that he wanted to be put in an important position. Naturally, Shibi would try his best to grasp this opportunity. After Nekov entered the main hall, he began to lead the negotiations without waiting for Yang Chendong to speak. "Are you here to represent the Ross Duchy to surrender?" As soon as they met, Shibi took the initiative to speak. He purposely turned the negotiations into surrender to see what kind of reaction the other party would have. Nekov's face turned red as he felt the other party looking down on him. If someone from the Ross Duchy spoke to him like this, he would immediately call for the guards. He would make the person who dared to provoke him pay a heavy price, even their life. However, this was a city controlled by the Han army. He was here to negotiate, so he could only suppress the anger in his heart. He said with an ugly expression, "General, you have misunderstood. I'm not here to surrender. I am here to represent the Ross Duchy to negotiate. You Han people have a saying, it is easier to make friends than enemies, so..." "Wait, negotiate?" Shibi shook his head as he spoke. "To be honest, there is no past friendship between us, so I don't think there is a need to negotiate. Of course, if you're here to surrender, we won't kill you. But if you're not, then there's no need to talk. Please leave." He did not even listen to the conditions and directly rejected him. Nikov's expression was extremely ugly. He really wanted to fling his sleeves and leave, but he also knew that if he wanted to do big things, he couldn't act on loyalty. He could only take 2 deep breaths, suppress the unhappiness in his heart, and say, "General, I don't know what you mean by surrender. Can you make it clear?" As expected, Nikov didn't leave. He recalled what Yang Chendong had told him before. Later on, he just had to say whatever was unpleasant to hear. The other party definitely wouldn't be provoked. At that time, he still couldn't believe it, but reality slapped him in the face. He truly admired Yang Chendong. This was a case of weak countries having no diplomacy. The so-called righteousness was sometimes very important, but when the strength of both sides was not on the same level, what was righteousness? Don't you hear that the winner is king and the loser is nothing? Nikov's power was weak, and Xiaobi naturally became stronger. And surrender? Naturally, you will have to open the city gates, surrender, and surrender. Hand over all your belongings and territories to us. Of course, even if you surrender, we won't kill all of you. We will definitely leave some things for you to eat." Xiaobi simply stated his intentions and then shut his mouth. He really wanted to see how Nikov would react. While he was still waiting for Xiaobi to continue, Nikov suddenly believed his words. At that moment, he realized that Xiaobi had finished speaking. He couldn't help but widen his eyes and ask, "That's it? It's over?" Xiaobi said with an expression as if it was natural. After hearing Xiaobi's affirmative answer, Nikov's face turned red with anger. "May I ask, what's the difference between the surrender and a battle to the death?" "Of course there's a difference. If you lose a battle to the death, you will be beheaded. If you surrender, at least you can live, right?" Xiaobi said with an expression as if he didn't want to die. Looking at Xiaobi's serious expression, Nikov finally understood that Xiaobi didn't have any intention of negotiating. In other words, Xiaobi was just going with the flow. Since that was the case, there was no need for him to stay. He cupped his hands and imitated the Han's gesture. After bidding farewell, he turned around and prepared to leave. At that moment, Yang Chendong, who had been watching the show, opened his mouth. Nikov, right? As soon as he spoke in fluent Russian, Nekov, who was about to leave, stopped in his tracks. His heart was filled with joy. It seems that the other party was just testing me. Now that he saw that I was about to leave, he became anxious. There was still room for negotiation. Although he was delighted, he pretended to be angry. He turned around and cupped his hands towards Yang Chendong. Yes, Your Highness Bugnam of Gojoseon. To be honest, your subordinate is too reckless. Enough. Without waiting for Nikov to continue, Yang Chendong interrupted him. Then he used an unquestionable Chinese and said, "Remember, Commander Xiaobi's words represent my meaning. There are only two paths for your Rossi country to take. Either you are destroyed by us, or you surrender. As for the so-called peace talks, that is simply impossible. The only difference is that the first path is death, while the second path is survival." When Yang Chendong said this with an unquestionable tone, he saw Nikov's shocked expression. Nikov must be thinking, if that's the case, why did you stop me? Do you want to repeat what you just said? Seeing the doubt in Nevikov's heart, Yang Chendong continued without waiting for him to ask. Since you have the guts to come and talk to this king about peace, this king will give you a chance. If there comes a day when your Ross Empire is unable to withstand this king's army, you will still have a chance to negotiate. Furthermore, at that time, I can leave you with 10% of your wealth and allow you to move out. At that time, you can choose any place in this king's territory to continue living. This way, your family clan will be able to survive. But remember, there are conditions. I want the lives of the blind Duke and Ivan. If you can't see them, even if you surrender, you can only guarantee that you won't die. You won't have any wealth, and your family won't be able to survive. After saying all this in one breath, Yang Chendong waved his hand and said, "Okay, you can leave now." Nikov walked out of the main hall in a daze. When he returned to his temporary residence, his emotions slowly stabilized. Then a smile appeared on his face. No matter what, this diplomatic mission was fruitful. At least he had an extra choice compared to others. As for whether he needed to do so, it would depend on the development of the situation. If the Russian army won, then it would be better if this matter never happened. On the other hand, if the Han army won, then he could make a choice. At least, he could ensure the safety of his family. Wasn't this what he was after? In the main hall, after Nikov left, she looked at Yang Chendong with a doubtful gaze. You don't understand? Or do you think that what I said just now was meaningless? Shibi nodded without concealing his inner thoughts. Sigh, the human heart. Yang Chendong sighed heavily. Just now, I only planted a seed of hope in Nikov's heart. It might not seem useful now, but when it came to a critical moment, the effect it would have would be astonishing. Why don't you wait and see, huh? Yang Chendong laughed confidently. After being a leader for so many years, his growth was very fast. For example, his control of the overall situation, his understanding of Xia's progress, and his ability to control people's hearts. The human heart was sometimes very complicated, but sometimes it was very simple. It all depended on how you guided it. Once you successfully guided people's hearts, it was equivalent to controlling the overall situation. It was equivalent to stepping into the threshold of victory. With regards to Yang Chendong's words, she was very convinced. When he heard this, he decided to wait and see. He wanted to see if Nikov, who left after being humiliated, would really deliver the heads of those two important people to him when the situation turned bad, as the sixth young master said. Moscow City. Nikov had returned. When Ivan received the news, he was digging trenches outside the city gates. His intention was very simple. He wanted to use these things to delay the Han cavalry's attack. This way, as long as they could drag it out until winter, the cold weather would become a helper and cause the Han army to retreat. This way, they would have more time to catch their breath. In the long run, they would be able to wear down the enemy's morale and obtain the final victory. Father-in-law wants to have a meeting and wants me to go? Ivan jumped out of a trench and looked at the soldier who came to pass on the message. Yes, Lord Nikev has returned. He said that he brought the latest news. The soldier said with a serious face. Good, lead the way. Ivan clapped his hands, and after removing the black mud on them, he strode forward. As he walked, he thought, this time, no matter what conditions Nikev used to force the Han army to retreat, he would not admit it. He would not accept any form of compensation for the ceasefire. He wanted to use his own strength to force the Han army to retreat. This was what a true man should do. Ivan, who already had his own ideas, was led to the main hall by the soldier. Here, the civil and military officials were already lined up on both sides. When Ivan entered, he noticed that everyone's expression was not too good. He guessed that the Han army's conditions were very harsh. This is also good. We can only fight to the death. Chapter 1469. Ivan, who had a heroic plot and also wanted to be a hero, thought so as he walked to his seat and stood still. About a quarter of an hour later, a few more ministers walked into the hall, followed by the Grand Duke of Blindness. Since everyone is here, let's hear what Nikowski has to say. Cough. Nikowski coughed, attracting everyone's attention. His expression was somewhat ugly as he said what he was willing to say. As for what Yang Chendong said, he naturally hid it in his heart. That was one of his life-saving treasures, so he would not easily show it to others. After Nekov finished his words, everyone in the hall became silent. No one thought that this would be the result. If they didn't surrender, they would die. Even peace talks were rejected. Did this mean that the Han army was too arrogant, or did they have enough confidence to defeat the Rus Empire? Ha! In the silence, a burst of laughter came from Ivan's mouth, attracting everyone's attention. Ivan, who had been laughing for a few times, finally stopped when he saw that everyone's attention was focused on him. He said, "All right, can everyone give up now? Who still wants to talk about peace with the Han army?" At the end, Ivan's voice was close to a roar. He was clearly very angry. None of the officials said anything about this. Just as Ivan said, if peace talks failed, then they could only fight. Everyone had the same idea. Okay, since it's like this, we don't need to have any illusions. Although the Han army is very strong and can destroy a behemoth like the Golden Horde, we are not to be trifled with. Young Master has already dug trenches outside the city, which can effectively stop the Han army's charge. As long as we can hold out until winter arrives, the other side will inevitably withdraw their troops. If we do this repeatedly with our advantage as the host, we can exhaust their spirit. At that time, we can decide whether to negotiate or fight. The blind duke finally spoke. This was the final decision. No one objected to this. Even those who wanted to surrender could only place their hopes on the army and hope that they could stop the Han army's attack. Since everyone had the same thoughts, the following matters were much easier to handle. Under the leadership and appointment of the Grand Duke of Blindness, Ivan, Boris, Peter, and Sergei respectively received the mission of guarding the 4 city gates. There were 100,000 soldiers originally prepared to assist the Golden Horde. Together with the 100,000 soldiers in the city, there were a total of 200,000 men under the command of 4 people, each with 50,000 generals. At the same time, the blind duke used his identity as the Duke of the Rossi Duchies to call out to the nearby powers, inviting them to help the king and deal with the Han army together. It was estimated that there were about 100,000 soldiers in this army. In this way, there were 300,000 soldiers defending Moscow. Even when facing the claws of the Golden Horde in the past, the Rus Empire had never treated them so formally. From this, it could be seen that they already regarded the Han army as their strongest enemy. After receiving the mission, the 4 great generals quickly started the work of digging trenches. This time, they were determined to defend the city to the death. They dug trenches everywhere, surrounding the entire city of Moscow and extending for more than 10 miles. It could be imagined that if the Han army appeared here, just filling up the road would be a big project. However, by doing this, they had also blocked their own way out. However, they did not care because they had already transferred all the food they could use into the city. It was not an exaggeration to say that they could hold on for 3 to 5 years. They did not believe that the Han army would be able to surround them for 3 to 5 years. If that was the case, then the cost of transporting grain and fodder would be an astronomical figure. At the same time, the Grand Duke of Blindness also mobilized the 500,000 White Russians in the city, asking them to help dig trenches outside the city. At the same time, he spread rumors, saying that the Han people were more terrifying than ferocious beasts. It seemed that once they broke through the city, everyone would face a dead end. After mobilizing the people, the trenches outside the city were pushed even faster. Some places were even more than 10 meters deep. Not to mention horses, even people could not pass through. Moscow was forcefully turned into an independent kingdom. The people inside could not come out, and the people outside could not go in. Finally, 10 days later, cavalry could be seen roaming outside the city. They were the scouts sent out by the 5-star army. However, they could only roam around for more than 10 miles. Countless large and deep holes blocked their path. Haha. On the city walls, the various officials and nobles used the 1,000-miles eye that they had obtained from the west. When they saw the scene of the Han cavalry roaming outside the city, they could not help but laugh. At this moment, it seemed like they were already the victors. The scene outside the city of Moscow was quickly reported to Yang Chendong, who was rushing here, by the scouts. When he heard that the enemy had dug countless trenches outside the city, and that some were even more than 10 meters deep, Yang Chendong was shocked. Are they looking for death? Yang Chendong sighed and could not help but laugh. Originally, Yang Chendong thought that the enemy also had cannons and guns. Although they were not as powerful as the Cold Front, they were still a threat. For this reason, Yang Chendong had arranged for Gray and the others to form a suicide squad. However, he never expected that the enemy would not use firearms and instead use trench tactics. That's right, they could indeed stop the advance of the 5-star army. However, while they could defend the ground, what about the air? How would they defend against their hot air balloons? At that time, countless bags of explosives would fall from the sky. They would not even be able to escape from the city. Wouldn't that be seeking death? Yang Chendong did not know who gave the idea to the Russian Empire. They would not die if they did not seek death. As such, Yang Chendong was not anxious. Since the enemy had already surrounded him, why would he be afraid of them escaping? Yang Chendong's face was filled with confidence. Orders. Take advantage of the fact that the soldiers in Moscow are unable to leave the city to deal with the White Russian soldiers on the outskirts. We will rendezvous with the 1st Sky Cavalry Legion outside Moscow. He was most worried that the enemy would escape before he arrived. If that happened, it would be a long process to find them. Now, he could finally rest assured and clean up the trash on the outskirts. This time, he would definitely destroy the Russian Empire. After the order was given, other than a portion of the army that continued to rush out of Moscow, the rest of the cavalry started to attack the nearby cities and tribes of the Russian Empire. Intelligence agents had long since reported that there were at least 100,000 White Russian soldiers in these small cities and tribes. This was a bone that needed to be gnawed on. Rostov City could be said to be the most powerful existence among them. Rostov City had a population of 300,000 and an army of 40,000. It was an existence second only to Moscow among the Russian Empire. The person in charge of this place was a noble from the Russian Empire, General Kurbsky. According to the information, this person was skilled in both civil and military matters. He was a difficult opponent. In the past, the Golden Horde had suffered many losses at his hands. This person was proficient in using firearms and had a strong learning ability. He was on par with Moscow, and this gave the Golden Horde a huge headache. That's it. Order Gray to lead the Death Squad to attack Rostov City. Also, call Ba Daojiang over. Yang Chendong already had an idea in his mind as he gave the order. 6 days later, 50,000 soldiers from the 5-star army arrived 8 miles away from Rostov City. They quickly formed an encirclement and surrounded the entire city. They looked like they were ready to attack at any time. Rostov City's 4 gates were already tightly shut. Although they didn't dig countless trenches outside the city like Moscow, the hundreds of cannons erected on the city walls proved their determination to fight to the death. Knowing that this was a tough nut to crack, the 5-star army sent Xiao Chao, the 1st Division commander of the new 2nd Army, Chai Ji, and the Death Squad's generals, Gray, Barry, and Yutu. There was also Ba Daojiang, who was personally sent by Yang Chendong to supervise the army. According to Yang Chendong, Ba Daojiang was here to boost everyone's morale and record everyone's performance. With such a person around, no matter who made a contribution, his name would appear in Yang Chendong's ears and reach the heavens. Everyone was quite happy with Ba Daojiang's arrival. After all, someone needed to spread the news of one's achievements. He was like a historian who could encourage people to do things seriously without worrying about their good deeds not being known by others. Gray was the most excited among them. He even took the initiative to invite Ba Daojiang for a drink to build their relationship. Gray had made a mistake and was sent to be the general of the death squad. This news had already spread among the surrendered Mongolian soldiers. However, because Yang Chendong didn't leave any traces behind, no one discovered his intentions. On the contrary, everyone thought that the Heavenly Khan was creating an opportunity for General Gray to rise again. After all, if he made a mistake, he had to be punished. Otherwise, how could he convince the masses? As for being the general of the death squad, he wasn't an ordinary soldier. There wasn't any danger. He just had to go through the motions. When he returned, he would naturally be rewarded with merits and could return to his previous status. Even Gray had the same thoughts as well. It was precisely because many people thought this way that no Mongolian general dared to cause trouble even though Ahuli had temporarily taken over his position. They were all waiting for General Gray's return. Everyone was kept in the dark, but some people who Yang Chendong trusted knew what was going on. Allowing soldiers to plunder was an unforgivable crime in the 5-star army. Even if you had made a great contribution, you shouldn't think of getting any benefits. Being expelled from the army was the lightest punishment. After doing this, Gray could indeed continue to serve in the army with the status of a general. This didn't make sense at all. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.